Okay, welcome everybody. Sorry, Jane, go ahead. You're good. Okay, sorry. Okay, we're jumping in. So just generally, we'll do a few preliminaries here, and then the meeting's kind of cut into two parts. We really want to focus with just the task group to see if we can get through some of our final work on recommendations this morning that we did a good work in advancing when we met together in Burlington in the Intervale, last week. So that's our primary goal. We'll have a public comment, take a break, and then it's really a chance for the subcommittee to ask questions of the task group about what we're doing and the like. And then we'll do a final public comment and next steps and close by 11:30. In a minute here, Jane will just describe kind of where the process is between the task group, the subcommittees, and the council, and we'll get to that in just a second. Just a reminder, this is particularly for folks who maybe aren't as active with our task group, is our ground rules are we ask people to kind of be present with a clear and open-minded heart. We ask people to listen generously across differences, which really means that, we may not always agree, but we try to actually listen and understand each other, to ask for what you need, to speak your truth while also tending to kind of how that's going to affect others, and then to honor complexity, given all the complex, context and relationships that we all have and the situation and the substantive issue at hand as well. So appreciate people doing that. Okay, so any additions or approvals to the 11 to 22 minutes for anybody? Any additions or corrections to that?
I don't believe I was present at that meeting. If this was the one at the Intervale.
Yeah, that was one Intervale, exactly.
So I'll abstain from any vote on that.
Great, thanks, Billy. Anybody else? Anybody, any other changes or corrections? Otherwise, we'll consider them approved. Okay, we'll consider those approved. Jane, I'll turn it over to you to just talk about kind of where we're at in the process. So Jane, maybe over to you on that and see if there's questions about that.
Yeah, thanks so much. So just ahead of today's conversation and then moving forward, I thought I'd highlight what the steering committee discussed this week, and then what I think is a logical progression for this work. And then you all can challenge us on that or think about it in other contexts if you'd like. But Liz really reinforced with the steering committee and her role as a counselor and steering committee rep that it feels important to carry the work that you all have done up as just an update next Monday at the council meeting. There isn't an expectation that the work will be finished and fully vetted through all the subcommittees yet, but there has been so much progress and so much work that it makes sense to update the council on Monday. And as this work sort of starts to move in a logical path, sort of up through what is the hierarchy of the climate council work, I just want to suggest a path. And so today, we're going to have this concerted effort amongst the task group to work on the recommendations. I want to propose a little bit of a different style in that space, and I'll talk about that. I'll come back to that. And then we'll have an opportunity for the subcommittees to weigh in and make comments and questions. But I don't think that we're really going to try and address those in a substantive way today. Pat and I are really thinking, because it's just an hour of time, that we want to have a discussion, dialogue with subcommittee members weighing in, but we're going to be working to put together a consolidated set of notes from the subcommittee members, recognizing that this won't be their only chance sort of to review and consider the recs. We can take in and hear some comments and notes from the council as first impressions next Monday. And then what I'd like to recommend is that the task group come back together one more time as a task group that sort of digests the notes that you hear today from the subcommittees, digest the notes from the council, and then sort of pass the work up and along to the full subcommittees and the council with that aim of that December council meeting. And the task group itself won't come back together again until the council acts in December and makes a decision point around how the task group will continue or not, and around what scope of work. So sort of like as we move up, there's this level of hierarchy, and I kind of feel like the task group will need one more shot to sort of process, vent, and work on the recommendations after today, hearing from the subcommittees, hearing preliminarily from the council. And then we'll have another shot with subcommittees to really substantively finish the draft. And then the council will act in December around the recommendations, including the recommendations that look at the continuation of this task group. So that's process-wise. I wanted to put out there. And then I also wanted for you all to consider in some of my conversations with some of you and others, you know, I think there's going to be a tricky space in some of the recommendations to reach full consensus from this task group and from the subcommittees also as we bring in more folks to the fold. And since the real decision point is the council, where and when we struggle and continue to struggle on word choices, what I'd like to recommend to all of you is that we can highlight the options and reach consensus on like two choices and carry up those two choices, but rather than ourselves sort of continue to wrestle indefinitely on like final language, I really think that decision point sits with the council, and our job, your job, I should say, is to reflect the differences amongst the task group and then let the council decide what that final language will be. And just, I don't want to sort of like throw a fire or whatever a good metaphor would be by bringing this up, but the word if that we keep sort of tiptoeing around, and Charlie brought back in an email to me, and we haven't decided if it's a when and how the plants close, if it's a if, when, and how in a study. I think we can highlight the two different choices in that statement, and if we as a group can't reach a decision, then the council should have to make that decision. And you all will have the chance, and maybe we just present it as the two options and have those two differing opinions presented both in the document and when it gets presented to the council. So I just recognize that reaching consensus, and you all are very intentional and thoughtful in the conversations, there might just be 2 or 3 sticking points on language. And I think that's okay, because I think ultimately the council needs to make the decision in that space. So just wanted to put clearly the stepwise process from here out for consideration, and then just a recommended approach that we may or may not have to use, because you all may reach consensus on language, and that would be great. But where and when we can't, I just think that's an appropriate sort of ask of the council for them to decide.
That's great. And Jane, just one thing to add, and I'll go to Judy. And I think in me looking at all the comments from the previous version with all the comments back from several weeks, and then all of the red line from last week, I have a few ideas that might thread the needle and may not, but I want to give it a shot with you all as we talked this morning. But Judy, go ahead.
Yeah, for the process, I'd like to recommend that not a person go to the council, but several people go to the council to present. And I'd also like to mention that the word if there was consensus reached. Liz disagreed, but agreed to disagree. So the use of the word if was agreed upon to eliminate.
Yeah, Charlie brought it back up to me in an email and wanted it back in, but
Which of course he always does.
Yeah, so, well, let's not, we won't attack.
Let's come back. I have an idea about that. So bear with, I have a thought about that. And I want to test a little bit. So let's hold on that and come back to it for sure.
Just real quick, I was going to put this in the chat, but since I was off mute, we as a task group have been turning off the chat in Zoom. And I have felt like that's been a really productive space for you all to work without the distraction of the chat. Pat's using it very strategically right now to highlight what we're talking about. But I can go in the back door and turn chat off. But I'm just going to ask not only subcommittee members, task group members, the members of the public, please abstain from using the chat today, and we'll just use it where it is helpful and just reinforcing points. And if I need to, I can turn it off again.
That's good. And Jane, I do think because we're focusing on a document and we've got a written piece in front of us, I do think it's been very helpful to keep us all, me included, focused. So I'd encourage us to keep with the chat off, at least for the drafting part we've been doing this morning. It seems to have helped everyone focus, I think. Okay. With that, any other questions on process before we jump into the document? We have kind of at least 3 areas we want to cover specifically that we know there's discussions we need to have. So what I'd like to do is this. I think there's the question of the if that Judy just raised. We need to kind of sort through that. And I want to test an idea with you all. We need to figure out what to do with thermal broadly, and then the kind of McNeil cogen within that. And then there was another clause around kind of accounting that's, I think, number 5 or 6 we didn't really talk about. So we need to get to that as well. So there's a few other things we need to address in this document in terms of helping educate people and opening paragraphs, but we'll come back to that in a bit. So Jane, I wonder if you could go to, let's see.
Can I just
real
jump
quick-
in just
Oh,
because
yeah.
I wasn't there last week? I have a couple very minor tweaks that I would like to suggest if there's an opportunity to do so.
And Billy, are you okay if, I mean, and if I'd like to go to kind of what 3, 4, and 5, if that's the right numbers, but then if you have tweaks there, just name them as we talk. If there are tweaks in other parts, why don't we come back after that and we'll make sure we give you a chance to do that. Does that work?
Sounds good. Yep.
All right, so just,
And I'm gonna keep the clean version up and work on that. And I just want to say that to be transparent, there's a track change version posted online. I also have it open on my computer, and if there's ever a question from all of you or any of you, we can toggle back and forth to see what was there, what's been changed, that kind of stuff. But I'll start. It's just so messy that I would suggest starting with this clean version.
I think, yeah, otherwise it's a little bit of a eye strain. Let's look at, Jane, could you go on 3? Could you go down a little bit? Let's see. Okay, so here, yeah, so I think that we've got this if question, and as Judy remarked, we thought we maybe had close to consensus with Liz sort of abstaining, or standing aside is probably a better word, standing aside, and we could explain that. I think Charlie, I think, came back to Jane and said, I'm not sure I can live without if being in there, and Billy wasn't in the meeting last week. But I have a question for you all. As I go down to the bottom bullet there, Jane, if you could. As I was just trying to write this, what struck me is the question really if, or is it really when? Because I think what I heard the group, and I want to test this with you, is the group say is, I don't know when. I think these things will be phased out. I don't know when, and when they will be phased out depends on, for some people, what I learned in the study. In other words, if we can't replace markets for wood, or there's some base problem for electricity, I might want these things to go longer just because of those issues, depending on what the study says. I think other people I've heard say, no, I think these things need to close ASAP. However, the study will be helpful to think about how we do the transition. So I wondered if the question, if we're really debating the if, or we're really just debating the when in terms of time frame. And that's why I wanted to test with the group. Now, if it is the if, we'll need to deal with it. So Liz, over to you first, and thanks for jumping in.
Yeah, no, I don't want to repeat last week. For me, it is both because of the phrasing of the rest of the paragraphs. So, if I'm not going to repeat what we said last week just because of timing, but for me, it is both. Thank you.
No, totally fair. And glad. Thanks for jumping in. Jane, with that, go back up to the clause with the if in it. Right. Okay. There we go. Right. So that I think Liz, I think helped us. My try did not work. Fair enough. So let's just jump into this. I think we need to figure out how to handle this if question. So we can, again, I think rather than trying to redebate or relitigate what we've already talked about, I think we need a way to acknowledge a range of opinions here in these recommendations regarding the if question. But Adam, over to you.
Yeah. So for me, I think I was fine with leaving if off. But as we then had the recommendation number 4, where it said, and study the potential for adding thermal, you can't study thermal in earnest with a open and objective approach if you're going to close the plant. So to me, that was the hinge that went from being okay with if being left off on 3 to the need to include it back because one contradicted the other in the absence of an if. And I just want to summarize that point.
Nope, Adam, that's very helpful. Richard.
Yeah, as those of you who were present last week know, I'm no big fan of this burning wood to generate electricity. And I was in favor of removing the word if so that we would be studying when and how to phase out the 2 existing biomass electricity facilities. I am confident, however, that a objective review of the available science will favor closing the plants. from a greenhouse gas point of view. I'm confident of that. So from that point of view, I'm not scared by keeping the if word in the document, because I'm confident that the science will support closing the plant. And if it doesn't, then we guess I will be wrong. I will have been proved wrong, and I will change my point of view. So although I have been in favor of just leaving when and how, I won't be super upset if we leave the if in.
Richard, thank you. Other subcommittee members want to weigh in on the if question? Judy, over to you.
I believe the if should be in as with the when and how. As we talked about many times. I know the research we've already received from various presenters shows that we should be closing it. I'm not so confident as Richard that people will see what and hear what we saw and heard from various speakers. So I think it should be left in.
So Judy, you're saying it as written here?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else want to express a different opinion here? Because otherwise, I think we can, as people can maybe live with this as described.
Pat, I'm fine with this. One of my comments is in the introductory paragraph to this section. So before we move on, if we could go to that, that'd be great.
You bet. Anything else on the if when question? Then we'll go to Billy's other point. Okay, Billy, let's go to the other point.
So could you just scroll up to show that? So my comment is, this seems to set up a dynamic that suggests wood fuel is not a renewable energy source. It says prepare to phase out the wood biomass plants and phase up of renewable energy sources. I think my understanding is the state defines this fuel source as renewable. Currently, I think most people see, wood as a sustainable local resource. So I don't know if that was intentional, but if the goal here is around reduced emissions, which I think is what most people who are interested in winding these plants down have been focusing on, that may be a more accurate framing for this recommendation.
Billy, just a question to your point. Would the word, I don't know if the word like non-wood renewable energy resources, I mean, I don't even want to renewable energy sources.
Or other renewable.
Or maybe other, maybe that's
Yeah,
better.
that's fine.
Okay. Judy, over to you.
Yeah, we've had this discussion several times when presenters have said it's not renewable and it's not sustainable. So it's best to leave it there. That's the science we got.
Richard.
I'll second what Judy just said. I want to read you something just really quickly. This is from Benjamin Franklin at the Constitutional Convention in 1787, and his sort of summing up of the work. He says, "I confess that there are several parts of this Constitution which I do not at present approve, but I'm not sure I shall never approve them. For having lived long, I have experienced many instances of being obliged by better information or fuller consideration to change opinions, even on important subjects which I once thought right, but have found to be otherwise."
Thanks, I appreciate that. And there's plenty of stuff in here that I don't necessarily agree with, that I'm just going to live with or keep an open mind to. But I think the fact that Vermont was, 70, 80% deforested in the 1800s, and now we're at 80% forest cover, speaks to the fact that our forests are vibrant and renewable and regenerate when harvested typically. So I think state law currently defines wood fuel as a renewable source. So I'm just trying to be factual here. So I think this change addresses my concerns. So thank you.
So I guess the question is we can say other people can't live with that. We could say energy sources, so it's vague. We could meet specifically to try to talk about essentially suggesting, I guess no to low GHG emission energy sources. But let's try to get to a wording if we can. Judy.
On that same number, how is this all going to be measurable?
Judy, say a little bit more, just for understanding.
Well, so they're going to recommend a plan. They're going to prepare a phase out. How is it measurable? Are they going to do it in 50 years from now? They're going to do it in 5 years from now?
Jane, go down a little bit further to the bottom in terms of bullets. Go down, I think that maybe the last one. Judy, I think just because when I was editing this, I wondered about the timing as well. So what I did was for people to try to understand the phase out, like at 5 years, 10 or 20, pick the time range, but to be more explicit about like looking at different scenarios. So like a pretty quick phase out and then one that takes longer and what the implications for each means. So that's
Well,
that bullet in there is there.
Well, if we're using words like immediate, 20-year phase outs isn't immediate.
When they think the study says, right, is to do the study immediately and get done quickly. The question of the phase out of timing is where we're not, I don't think, in agreement. So that's why we want to look at scenarios. And whether the 5, 10, and 20 is right, or it should be some other number, I don't know. Let me just finish up Billy's point, and Judy, we can come to this point. So, I mean, in the spirit of moving forward, can people live with the word other renewable energy sources? And if not, then please suggest a language that people could live with. Okay, can people, again, we're gonna leave it in unless someone wants to offer an alternative wording. Richard, go ahead.
Yeah, my posture all along has been that we should be treating wood as partially renewable, as an energy source. That's been my posture throughout this consideration. More renewable than coal or fuel oil, and less renewable than sun or wind.
And are you okay with the word other, Richard, or do you have a better formulation?
Well, the other implies that that this is renewable, but we're looking for other renewable. I don't think we should feel bounded by this fact that statute defines what's renewable and what isn't. Statute is a human creation and it can be changed.
And again, I think rather than I'm going to suggest at this point, we can definitely argue that, but I think the key is let's just get some words we can live with. So I'm wondering whether it's phase up of other energy sources and leave it at that. Then we don't have to debate the word renewable. It leaves it vague, but the Climate Council is already dealing with obviously low to no carbon other sources anyway. So I wonder if we could just say other energy sources. Judy.
Yeah, I think the other needs to go. I agree with Richard. Things have changed. I mean, we just voted on not having slavery in this state. Come on, it can change. It only took what, 200 years? And this has a very short time frame in which all of this can happen. And I don't think we should be debating renewable because it could change tomorrow.
What about if we, Richard and Judy, what if we said this? What if we said other more renewable energy sources?
That's exactly what I was going to suggest.
Yeah.
Having thought about it for a moment.
All right. So, all right. Billy, others, how does that look?
I don't like it, but I'll live with it. Every energy source has a cost. The way that we use it and transfer it to energy that we can use for thermoelectric and other applications. I've heard people on this group raise issues with large-scale hydro. Large-scale hydro would be considered a more renewable energy source than wood in this context, right? I think we're picking winners here when we haven't even defined what renewable means in the context of this suite of recommendations. So I don't think it's appropriate. I don't feel comfortable about it. I'll live with it. I'll provide my begrudging consent so we can move this process forward, but I just don't think it's right. So I'll leave it there.
Adam.
Yeah, I agree with Billy. I mean, I think it'd just be the easiest thing to do is just say other energy sources. Boom, like other, and it's just implied that they were trying to find something better. But let's not be disparaging the language. Like, just keep it neutral.
And then we don't have to debate over what's more renewable, what's not either.
Exactly.
So,
It just eliminates that from the conversation.
all right, I'm gonna leave it at that, unless otherwise noted, so we can keep moving. Okay, Jane, go down to bullets here. So here's what we did. This is, I think, maybe Jane, you can describe this. I think Charlie's, maybe I did some editing. I think Charlie gave us some suggestions. So Jane, maybe you can cover this bullet.
Yeah, this was the one that we talked about specifically about a just transition component around the Vermont forest products industry. I think that the first unhighlighted, or I should say unbolden italic section is pretty straightforward and gets exactly at what we discussed and sort of asked Charlie to put language to. But then the last part is a question that Charlie asked. He would like to see that last sentence added, but it's obviously a much stronger statement, and put it forward to all of you, where it actually calls attention to actually providing and pausing, waiting for those plants to close until we've been able to determine alternate markets that are aligned with climate objectives. So it talks about some of the markets we discussed last time when we met around like wood cellulose, things like that, that would give an alternative stream for a product that had been being sent to Reigate and McNeil.
So I think the language before it's, I think in general, it's in agreement of the group. I think that last bolded one is the question. So I want people to weigh on that last bolded sentence. That's something you could live with, something you could live with if we altered, or something you can't live with. Judy.
Didn't we have research that most of the wood is coming from out of state?
I think about half, was that right? If I remember right.
Something
Yeah,
like that. So
It's
why,
50%, yeah, which is
Okay.
still quite a lot coming in Vermont.
so are we expected to find alternate markets in Vermont? Or out of state, or what?
Yeah, that's it. We could definitely, that would be a change that you could recommend, is speaking to the markets in Vermont and specifically for the Vermont wood.
I think, Judy, I think Charlie's point was alternate marks, but for Vermont's wood, I think specifically, correct, Judy? Jane, I think Billy meant specifically to Vermont.
You mean Charlie?
Yeah, Charlie, sorry, yeah. Apparently, I'm getting like my mother, I can't remember everybody's name. Chase, over to you and then to Richard.
Yeah, thank you. I think that the sentiment here in the direction that this is moving is great. I think that the one area that would benefit from change is the use of the word before in that final clause there. It might be that identifying those alternative markets does happen before plant closure occurs, but it also might be that it happens simultaneously with the plants closing. And frankly, if it, there are market forces here that are out of our control, and it might be that the plants close next week and or later this spring. And so as far as like just the temporal consideration goes, I think that we ought to be planning now to find those alternative markets, and we ought to do so earnestly. And it might be that we find those markets before the plants close, and it might be that we find those markets after the plants close, but due to factors out of our control in some instances. So that'd be the one change I'd suggest.
Great, Chase. And do you want to put, Jane, just maybe alternate markets for Vermont wood? Maybe we're just explicit about that. So we say, just so we're talking about. Good. And then Richard, thank you. We're next.
Yeah, I think I was going to suggest something like what you've just done, so I'll put my hand down.
Okay. Judy.
I didn't lower it from last time.
So is there anybody who cannot live with the bolded language as revised?
So again, what is this market? Is this market for the people who work there? Is this market for the haulers? Do we know if the haulers are in-state and out of state? I mean, if the wood's coming, 50% of the wood is coming out of state, are the haulers from out of state?
I
right.
think, Judy, this is specific to this last statement in particular is specific to the actual wood. It's not about the people, this last statement. It's about where's the wood that would have gone to those plants going to go and what's it going to be used for instead. So it's actually assuming that is the way I read that sentence. So the preceding sentences are more about the people and the supporting infrastructure, but the last sentence is specific to the wood that would have gone to those plants, finding a new market stream for it.
Well, and our whole discussion has been about reducing the amount of trees that are cut down. So why do we want to continue to find a market?
That's been one of our, I think, debates about that is what's the purpose of forests and wood, and what does that mean? So, Billy.
Thanks, Pat. So from the first Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee meeting that Abby and I co-chaired, I've taken the position that Vermont's forests are our greatest asset for climate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience, and that above all else, we need to maintain the proportionate amount of forest we have across our landscape into the future if we want to be successful addressing the climate crisis. And I've also held that, at least currently, the market for locally produced wood products helps landowners maintain their forested parcels in forested condition, helps provide alternatives to parcelization, to fragmentation, to residential development of those lands, and keeps Vermont's forests as forests. So I think this is really critical, right? We can debate the climate benefits of the utilization of wood fuel for electricity, but they are providing an income stream that is keeping a sector together, that is helping landowners keep their forests in a forested condition. So I think this is really important. And I don't think it's just about a market for the wood. If we can develop alternative income streams and mechanisms to keep, in the long run, our forests in private ownership, that's great, right? But we don't have that right now. So I think we still need to rely on these markets and the economic benefits associated with them to help support this condition.
Right. And notice what Jane just added is to try to capture what Billy just said, and then Chase, and then Judy.
Yeah, Billy, I'm been on the AGO and ecosystem meeting since the first time too, and I've totally disagreed with you on that topic. We have learned that clear cutting of forest is still counted as a forest, because it's not going to have houses built on it. And it may take 80 to 100 years to build up the trees that were sequestering carbon originally on there. And so I've come to the conclusion, and from the very beginning disagreed with you, that we can't look at all forests as equal. We cannot look at the fact that our forests are safe, or that they're going to continue sequestering if we're looking at alternative markets to cut down the same trees again.
I mean, one thought I had to try to just language-wise, and I'll go to Chase, is to say alternate markets and uses for Vermont wood aligned with climate objectives must be secured. So that could allow uses like leaving it there and getting paid for it. Someone decides to leave it there because the state provides an incentive. It could be a number of things. But that, it was one thought to try to allow for both, but just a thought. Chase.
Patrick, you didn't address my concern. My concern is the opposite.
Right. I think, Judy, to make sure, I think one of the longstanding discussions we've had in this group, and it's not just been with you, is I think a back and forth about what is the role of Vermont forests, and should we leave them in place primarily to sequester carbon and store carbon because they have value in and of themselves as ecosystems and the like, and they also have cultural value potentially as well in that state, versus those who argue that they need to have an economic, income stream and the like for a variety of reasons. And that's been kind of a debate I don't think we're going to resolve in this group.
Well, then why do you insist on adding a sentence that sways it one way? the
Judy,
opposite.
Judy, I'm not trying to sway it. I'm trying to help you all get to an answer so you can for these recommendations together. So why don't I go to Chase and come back to you to see if you have alternative language that we could put in here that you and others could live with. Chase, go ahead.
Thanks. Two comments on this bullet point. The first would pertain to the beginning of the initial sentence up at the top. It seems to me that it'd be helpful if this bullet point was framed within the context of the Global Warming Solutions Act, which requires just transition and investigation of a just transition. And so I would suggest that we change that first clause to say something like an investigation of the just transition for Vermont's forest economy, the plant closure could necessitate, or something to that effect. So this is framed within the context of what the Global Warming Solutions Act contemplates and considers. And then the second suggestion is jumping down to that last sentence, the one that is bolded right now. I think as it reads right now, there's a little bit of dissonance with the rest of the bullet point, which the rest of it speaks about an investigation. And then this last part, I think, sort of is a bit separate or divorced from the investigation. So I would just make this last sentence part of the investigation. So something like, as adding words at the very beginning that might say something like, as part of the investigation, or the investigation shall consider alternate markets, et cetera, just so that it's clear that this is a consideration that is informing the investigation, will be part of the report that would be produced. Yeah, so just to clarify the scope of what we're talking about.
Just two things, Jane, in terms of, I think what Chaser says, an investigation of a just, so I guess what would be the investigation of a just transition for Vermont's.
Yeah, and that first clause up at the top that's being highlighted right now, I think perhaps the word cause, the last word in that clause there, might want to be changed to something like could necessitate, or some sort of similar word.
I like literally have no idea how to spell necessitate. I don't have to do it publicly.
Thank you, Jane, for jumping in. Sorry, my Zoom crash. Well, you can get the spelling. There you go. Chase, does that look right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think we'll probably want to like tweak and tune this up, but I appreciate both of those changes. Thank you.
And then I think that Jane added that investigation right at the bottom under the bold section. So, okay, great. Judy, then Billy.
I agree with those changes.
Great, thanks so much. Billy.
Just read real quick. I think that those look good. My last request on this would be whether we can, in the kind of middle where we talked about the values associated with the values these markets currently provide, if we could kind of build in kind of support for landowners, long-term maintenance and stewardship of Vermont's forests. You know, we talk about public good and things of that nature, but you know, maybe right off the importance of those markets in supporting private land stewardship of Vermont's forests. Comma. Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay.
I thought we were not going to use the word working lands, right? It's not in there, is it?
I don't think it is. Let's see. I'm trying to read it right now.
It was, but I think yeah, there it is.
Could is there a different term we could use? Let's see, a port for the associated, just
About just land.
Yeah.
And the word stewardship implies hierarchy.
Could you help me? Could you speak to that a little further, Judy?
Hierarchy?
Yeah, I just don't understand what it means in that context.
People are controlling the land. It's not an equal, and equity is an issue we should be addressing. Equity includes the land. If you use the word stewardship, somebody's over the land.
Two things, Jane, I think you just strike working lands and the sentence still works. So we just strike working lands. I think a support for associated enterprises in rural communities still works. So I don't know that you even need working lands at all. And lands by itself maybe doesn't quite work just grammatically, but I think if you strike working lands together, it still works as a sentence or clause. I think back to then the point about stewardship.
So how about in
Yeah.
supporting private landowners maintaining Vermont's forests as forests?
Judy, how does that sound?
Yeah, but are private landowners doing that? Aren't they doing it under direction from others that have specific goals?
I believe if you own a 100-acre woodlot in Vermont, you have a range of options of what to do with that land. You can clear it for agriculture. You could subdivide it and build houses or commercial enterprises on it. You can maintain it in a forested condition and manage it for forest products. You could leave it unmanaged. There's a range of, I think, decisions that landowners have. And I think part of the thrust of this bullet is that these markets are a tool that helps a large section of private landowners maintain their land in a forested condition.
Richard, go ahead. Richard, did I just lose Richard?
No, I just didn't didn't unmute myself.
There you are.
I'm listening to Billy, and I want to try to paraphrase what I think I'm hearing. This is not the first time we've gone over this ground. That if we look at greenhouse gas emissions, which is my bottom line, that a strategy that supports local landowners could result in a better outcome with respect to greenhouse gases than one that doesn't. Billy, is that a fair assessment?
I think it depends what that strategy is supporting those landowners to do, but certainly.
I want to just issue a cautionary note, which is that I can imagine a scenario in which supporting local landowners in whatever way needs to be done in order to maximize greenhouse gas production or minimize greenhouse gas production from the wood use may actually still result in an increase in greenhouse gas production, even though it's better than the alternative would have been. And as I've said before in meetings of this task group, if we say that there are other values that are as important or more important than greenhouse gas releases, resilience of local communities, supporting the social fabric of rural Vermont, and so on. If we say that those are really important to us and perhaps more important than greenhouse gas releases, then we need to consider that we may have to, in order to achieve our climate goals, we may have to reduce greenhouse gas release more somewhere else, get bigger reductions from vehicles or buildings or aspects of agriculture than we would otherwise. And that's okay. We just need to be open and clear that we're valuing something else, knowing that it has a small cost in terms of our greenhouse gas emissions.
So, Richard, anything else on this language for now in this bullet, this long bullet?
Thank you for being concrete and goal-oriented. I don't have anything more to say about the specific language right now.
Great, Richard, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Richard. I just one last point, because I think maybe we're kind of talking past each other a little bit, because these are a little complicated topics. But the carbon budget that was completed for the the climate action plan, basically indicated that, we've had a slow but steady loss of Vermont forests over the past 10 or 15 years. And given and the amount of carbon that our forests are currently sequestering and storing, if we hope to achieve a net zero condition by 2050, which is effectively a requirement of the Global Warming Solutions Act, we need to kind of stem that forest loss and maintain our near current levels of forest cover to hit that 2050 goal, even if we achieve all the emissions reductions targets found elsewhere in the Global Warming Solutions Act. So my point is that we need to keep our forests intact to be successful, because they are providing this tremendous value of carbon storage and sequestration. And if we lose significantly more forest, we're going to need to reduce emissions even further than what the Global Warming Solution Act calls for across a number of sectors. So I think we're effectively saying the same thing. Forests are good. We want to keep them around. There's a range of different ways to get there. Some have maybe more carbon intensity, some have less, but overall, the maintenance of those forests is really important.
Judy, maybe a final word on this for now. Judy, go for it.
So we have been trying to maintain what we have as a forest, and clearly it has not worked. As we've talked about in the past, we have to increase the size of our forest. And by putting economy first over the forest, we're never going to tip the scale. We're always going to be even.
Judy, any other final comments? And I'm going to maybe move to the next bullet.
So you're going to leave that one as is?
That's the question. Is there any final changes you would want to make in it?
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing to address the forest economy over the health of a forest and the fact that we need to increase the size of our forest, the opposite of what Billy has been saying, should be addressed in this.
Judy, just in my defense, I've been explicitly saying we need to maintain the amount of forest we have now at a minimum and ideally grow it, of course, but we're losing it. And I think first and foremost, we need to stem that loss.
Yeah, but you didn't say that the first time.
Yeah, Judy, I'm trying to figure if we could figure out a way to say something about maintaining. I'm not sure what it is, but essentially maintaining Vermont's forest generally. We'll launch into the details.
Well, we don't want to maintain, we want to increase. We've been maintaining, and that's not working.
Right. I'm trying to remember, Jane, anywhere else in the document, do we mention forest generally, forest cover or forest amount anywhere else?
One of the bullets that we haven't looked at on 4 that talks about the other task group, I almost, the formation potentially of a new task group talks about these kinds of issues, these larger forest issues. That's one of the 2 we haven't talked about yet.
Okay,
if I remember correctly.
Why don't we, can we put a note on that?
This new task group.
Okay.
This feels like a spot where you could make a stronger statement about forests and the recognition that, yeah.
So why don't we do this? Can we go back up to that paragraph and just put we need to address something about, or in that, like that longer bullet there, right? Just, I think we need to address something about forest writ large. I think we can look at the language below, maybe we come to something and then we can fold it back up into this one. So I just don't want to lose Judy's point that we need to say something about forest writ large.
Well, and I mean, we have this statement where, and maybe we have the ensuring that the management of Vermont forests for the public good. Maybe we could sort of edit that to make that stronger, or speak something about the management and enhancement or growth. I don't know, something here.
The management is not working because we're losing, as Billy said, we're losing more forests in some places, maintaining in others. And we need to increase the amount of forests we have. And the diversity, I mean, when you cut that down, we haven't even mentioned diversity.
Judy, what about the language that Jane just put in there? Now take a look at that, see what you think.
It
I
doesn't,
don't,
it reads a little awkwardly, but
yeah, I don't like for the public good. I mean, ensure that the management and ultimately the enhancement of Vermont's forest for the increase of carbon storage or something like that. I don't know.
Maybe for carbon storage, biodiversity, and other benefits.
Yes, yes.
I just put other benefits, Jane, only because I think there are things like water quality and other things that forests provide too. So we don't need to list them all, but yeah.
Yeah, because we've seen reports from presenters that there's more carbon stored in forests that are unmanaged than those that are managed.
yes, storage, yep.
So
Sequestration's a little different.
Judy, is that looking better now?
Ensuring. Yeah, maybe there's a lot of ands in there, but yeah.
Yeah. What about biodiversity conservation? Is it should just be biodiversity or should we add conservation?
Biodiversity.
Yeah, a conservation is fine.
Okay. So then this is where things will get a little complicated. So the next bullet we just mentioned in this thing, which is really focused on the phase out, is we just mentioned the notion of the cogen for thermal heat is part of it, has to be considered as part of the study. And then we have a longer conversation about this in the next number. So the thought was to kind of keep this short, just note it, and then we would have to have the longer conversation about the topic in I think what's number 4.
Yeah, but that was where we ended our discussion last time, right?
Exactly.
So we weren't in agreement that there should be a study. We weren't in agreement, but the discussion was out there that there should be a recommendation to not allow heat because it would be going from wood to fossil fuels.
Let's to that. Let's jump to 4 for a minute. We'll need to come back to this phrase, but the longer language is in 4, so I think we should just look at that. So the way that again, in taking all the comments we tried to rewrite was to talk. This is now really focusing broadly on the question of thermal heat and the role of Vermont's forests. And there's a general statement about forming a task group. And then there's a specific statement about what this means for the Big Neo plant in particular. So maybe let's focus for now on this yellowed clause right here that Jane has highlighted.
Well, before that, you list a bunch of things just in the paragraph above. You list process to ensure clear directive and the capacity to support the task group. I think you should also list in that the impacts of health on people.
Jane, can you go back to that scene? So you want more in here about in this scope about, and this is about thermal heat. And so one thing they should look at on thermal heat is
just a reminder, we have that other whole bullet that focuses on health. This is really
I read that, but I just think this one is specifically asking the Vermont Council to do something specific, and I think they should also be considering health impacts.
So what we could say is climate solution, the impact on Vermont's forests, and other potential impacts like air quality or public health, however we phrase it. We could do something like that. And that Jane would be at that top sentence in number 4.
Correct.
So it'd be as a climate solution and the impact on Vermont's forests and other impacts such as. Yeah. Judy, does that address your point?
The impact on forest and other impacts. Yes, thank you.
Great. So if we look at the highlighted yellow part, maybe first, only because it's, I think, where we were last, as you said, we were last time. And we'll come back to the new task group business. But I think, Jane, do you mind scrolling down to the yellowed part? Thanks a lot. All right, so people can look at this language, and this is kind of where we left off. So we'll see what we can do here. So it's noting this is primarily a thermal heat question, and that we recognize that even if the electricity part is phased out, they still could exist potentially as, say, a smaller sort of, a heat producing facility. And there's also cultural impacts as well as air quality impacts and others. So my sense is there's not an agreement in this group about what to do, but there's an at least agreement that this needs to be understood. Adam.
I would encourage us, I think this came up in the conversation last time, that this whole bullet be incorporated in 3, because it's part of the phasing and looking at if, when, and how to phase out the power plants, and keep 4 specific to just thermal only applications, and not muddy the water by having these 2 bullets kind of mixing these 2 on the thermal front.
So
that would be my recommendation.
Adam, maybe what we can do is let's see if we can get this bullet right, and then we can maybe then easily agree to move it up into section 3 versus 4. So Adam, do you have any comments on the bullet itself, assuming it goes into section 3?
No, I mean, I think it's fine. I just think it's better dealt with in 3.
Great. Any other comments on the paragraph itself? Chase, then Judy.
So I appreciate that this bullet calls out the impacts on human health, which is one of many important equity considerations. But I think that this bullet really requires a more robust description of the type of equity analysis that would be needed here, because I think fundamentally this project is one that is sited in a place that is adjacent to communities that are overburdened, but the benefits from the project are then had by different communities, primarily wealthier communities that haven't borne those types of burdens. And so I think we need to add some specific language here after I'd strike the words at the least, and then add to the list of things that would have to be considered, like a complete equity analysis. This might be a good opportunity in place for us to call out the work that's already been done by the Vermont Just Transition Subcommittee in creating criteria to evaluate specific projects. We could incorporate a requirement that those criteria be used here to evaluate these types of projects. Really, I think that this just needs to be made more robust, because the types of really the dynamic that's at play here is a particularly sensitive and potentially very problematic one.
Let me Jane finish the sentence here, and then we can Chase. Let's look at that, and then we'll go to Judy. So how does that look as what Jane's just drafted?
Yeah, I think that that's directionally right. We might want to tune it up a little bit, but yeah, that's great. Thank you, Jane.
You bet. Judy, then Richard.
I would also add the information we received from speakers, Darren Springer and one other guy that was on the day that he was on, where that they should investigate the increase of greenhouse gas emission by 4% and the use of fossil fuels if they go to heat.
So one is emission increases and one is a fuel switching, if that's the right term. I'm not sure if it
My
is.
recollection is they said they were going to increase their fuel consumption by 4%. I could have that wrong. I don't know if that's a direct equivalent to emissions. But
We could Jason. My memory was that a 4% increase in emissions. I don't remember which ones, but they would still be within their air quality permit limits. But I don't remember the details at all.
Well, at any rate, we don't want to increase and we don't want to switch to fossil fuels.
just to be clear, this is displacing a thermal load that's currently satisfied by natural gas, fossil fuels, or oil, right? So.
That doesn't make it better. We're
Okay,
supposed to be looking at reducing the fossil fuels.
We just want to say that must examine air emissions or changes in air emissions, impacts in air quality and health. I'm not sure what to do about the kind of the fuel switching question, which has come up before, but so I think we can add emissions in there for sure.
Patrick, this is Richard. I'm just going to jump in here because it's what you're trying to do here. This sentence there's a sentence here that has two similar but unlike items in it. It's in addition to climate and forest implications, the investigation must examine impacts on air quality and emissions and the health of the residents, period. The residents of the adjacent communities, period. It must also include a full equity assessment.
Good, that's helpful, Richard. That's better. There we go.
So the equity assessment is not part of the health assessment.
That's right.
It's related to it, but it's not part of it.
That's good because it might address other things as well, for sure. So just burdens on traffic, any number of things. Judy, did you?
Yeah, that looks good. I'm sorry, I got phones ringing off the hook here today. Yeah, that looks good. Thank you, Richard, for the suggestions. It fits into what I was thinking.
Richard, do you have another comment? Oh, okay, Chase.
Thanks. I think that the addition of a thermal only replacement is somewhat new. I recall that has sort of been talked about recently, but not sort of explicitly over a longer period of time. And so I think that if that is now really on the table as a potential policy consideration, then I think we should also add a requirement of looking at siting. Because if we're really thinking about shutting down the electricity generation component of this and turning it into something that would be purely thermal led, then that type of large change should at least create the situation in which we consider whether that thermal led application should be moved to the place that is going to be using that thermal energy, since we're not then talking about waste heat from the electricity generation. And I think that may have efficiency, considerations, because we don't want to lose any of the heat during transmission over that long pipeline, but also important equity considerations, because where it would be cited now, as I said a moment ago, places the burdens on one community or communities while the benefits are enjoyed by different communities. And so, long way of saying, I think we should add in here a consideration around siting for a thermal only application, specifically one that would look to siting it in the place where the benefits would be enjoyed, so that the burdens and the benefits are all realized by the same people, and there aren't disproportionate burdens placed on others.
So we'd say something, I'm not going to get this quite right, but like if it's a thermal only replacement, then siting also needs to be examined, including siting it much closer to where it would actually provide the heat or something to that effect.
Yeah, sure. That's directionally right. Yeah, I think much closer sort of creates a bit of a situation in which potentially, it would still be located in a site where the burdens of the facility would be felt by a community that is not obtaining the benefits of it, which that then creates potential equity issues. But otherwise, yeah, I think that's directionally right.
Gene, I wonder if we put a sentence in there before the equity assessment, because the equity assessment could include also looking at the siting choices. So just before the equity sentence, it's something about, if a thermal only sort of alternative is, explored, developed, then siting must be considered to considering siting as, adjacent to or close to, whatever the right words are, adjacent to the recipient of the heat. I'm not even sure that's the right words, but. And I don't know, Chase, whether you want something more explicit about citing options or citing alternatives, including, what do you think?
I mean, I would always favor more explicit language, but I think that we have the express call for a full equity evaluation. Following that, I think that the ultimate concern would be met by that evaluation, that if siting is being considered, if we're considering the full equity implications of these decisions, that should get the job done.
Okay. Anything else on this paragraph right now?
Yeah, Chase, I want to know more about that because they want to heat UVM and McNeil. And what are we talking, 2 miles? So is that considered close?
Yeah, I would not consider that close. And I think, this is a decision that if ultimately made, I think should be informed by a full equity evaluation. And really where I'm getting at with the siting question, wanting to put siting on the table is to make sure that a facility that is producing toxic air pollutants like fine particulate matter isn't sited in a historically marginalized community, while the benefit of that combustion, the heat, is sent to a historically privileged community.
So shouldn't we say that then? Because I can see them coming back with saying, yeah, we're in the proximity, we're 2 miles away.
I think what we want to do is siting should be considered, particularly in relation to impacts on overburdened communities or something to that effect, I think is what we're getting at.
That's a great addition, Pat. I appreciate that. What do you think of that, Judy?
Yeah, that's good. It just narrows it down a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So
just to keep us honed to facts, it's about a mile from the plant to the UVM campus.
Great. All right. So anything else in this paragraph? And then I'm going to just test Adam's thought of moving this up into our number 3, and we'll replace that short bullet I had up there. So what we take then is this paragraph and we'd move it up into number 3 and replace the very short bullet about this question with this longer bullet there. Okay. And we'll have to write that first sentence, Jane, we'll have to fix a little bit, but generally the idea. So it would replace this thing here exactly.
Replace it?
Yeah, well, because it's the same. The short bullet was the short bullet didn't say very much. It just mentioned it. And so this gives much more detail about what's expected.
Oh, but it did say a lot. It said phase out.
Good. Pull that, Jane, leave in the longer bullet, then pull in can you pull in leave that longer one in. Now, can you find the shorter one from before? I can also go to the.
It says implications for phase out in relation to the long proposed McNeil plant expansion for cogeneration of thermal heat for district heating. And then it ends.
What we could do is have that as the opening sentence actually to this longer paragraph now.
Yeah, it needs to be finished. It's not finished.
And then what we could do is, and I think that could be an opening paragraph to that longer paragraph, Jane. I think, we could just, let me see, leave 4 in for now. Let's see, go back up. Sorry,
You need
Jane.
to stop sharing for 1 second, but because I know what you're trying to do, but with all the windows, I can't navigate easily. So just give me a second.
Yeah, no problem. No problem.
And I'll reshare it in a second.
We do is have that opening sentence leave in as Judy suggested, which then would flow would be the rest of that paragraph.
I know what we're trying to do here.
Okay. Give us time.
I lost my sentence though, so hold on.
Thank you for editing. That's okay. My Zoom crashed out anyway a minute ago, as you all know, so no worries. What I want to do next after we kind of look at this is I do want to go to number 5 because we haven't discussed it, and I want to make sure we discuss it before public comment. So let's see if we can get this bullet right, and then I want to go to, I think, what it is, number 5.
Hold on. Okay, so I have it I left the implications for a phase out in relation to the long proposed McNeil expansion. And then I should probably say this, an investigation of this will need to include, or I should edit that the first sentence, which I can do, but I just took what we just worked on and carried it up here
Good. And then left in that part that Judy asked to be left in. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
So let me just play around with the transition sentence there in a second. Should I just say this review?
Maybe that's good.
And then it just goes into the whole other thing.
Yeah. Okay. Judy, does that help?
Thank you.
All right, let's go to what is number 5 or whatever it is.
You don't want to finish that one little bullet?
This is the last one, Judy.
No, the one, oh, I guess it's not on there. Yeah, the study should clearly look at a timeline. And then there's a highlighted yellow for the.
Yeah, this one right here. I just
Right.
unhighlighted it.
Sure, but why don't you're right. Why don't we finish that off before I go to number 5? So the question is, do you want to put, this is my effort to try to thread the needle of the if question, but it may be we could just drop this sentence, or if you want to leave it in, we could leave it in and or change the time frame. So, and maybe it's better to leave it more general. What do people think?
Yeah, I don't think we should. I mean, we're in a crisis. I don't think we should say, the study should be taking or understanding implication for 20 years out or even 10 years out. We shouldn't be dealing with stuff that has such health hazards at 5 years out. This should be immediate, like we said earlier.
And I think maybe the easiest thing to do is just drop that sentence. Richard, go ahead.
Yes, drop it. Thanks.
Good, done. Good. Okay. Number 4, we're not quite done with, but I want to go to 5 because we haven't really talked about it at all. And so I want to look at 5 if we could. Okay, so this one I don't think we've had much discussion about. And so I think we need to just get a sense of what people's thinking is about this number 5. So I think this is really kind of a discussion. And we noted that I believe Maine is already moving in this accounting direction for what that's worth.
So I have some real questions about this. I wasn't at the meeting last week, so I didn't benefit from the conversation, but doesn't the Global Warming Solution Act has emissions reductions targets that are tied to baselines that were established through the current inventory rubric. So if we are going to start to change how we inventory emissions, we're going to have to revisit those baselines. So this seems like incredibly important and not really something we've had any real discussion about. So I'm not against this concept, but I just don't even know what the follow-on effects of this change would be.
And
we may have discussed that last week, so I apologize if I missed that.
Bill, you missed nothing because we never got to it. So
Okay.
you're right. You're right with us. So no worries. I don't know. Is Colin with this? I don't know if anyone can speak to this or who felt this was important to have in it. It developed over time, but we just haven't talked about it yet. So Jane, do you want to speak to it? And then maybe Richard.
Well, I'm hoping Colin's here, but if he's not, I can at least basically explain.
I am
So
here if you'd like, Jane, but
Well, Colin, I'm going to give it like the 2-second overview and you can ground truth me.
sounds great.
So essentially what something like this, there's a couple things going on. There's like the baseline years, and we would have to, and if we were to consider counting wood at the point of combustion within the inventory, we'd have to extrapolate that back to 1990. That is what a state like Maine is doing now and is not an impossible task. It would change the sector proportionality, I think is what Billy's alluding to, and would obviously increase the electricity sector. And that would have implications across the board, as well as it would significantly increase the buildings and thermal sector of the emissions. And Colin has calculated that data. It's an appendix in our inventory generally, and we're talking about including that in the gross inventory rather than the way we do it right now. And I will just say, we noted this around Maine because that was a statutory change last year that their legislature made them count biogenic emissions. And that's not something that we actually even knew of. I think others knew about this, but I didn't know about this till recently. And this will be the first year that they start to do that in Maine. So when we did our analysis and said that no other state counts it in their gross emissions inventory, that was true 2 years ago. It's not true for Maine now.
Great. Colin, maybe more detail as needed, then I'll go to Richard.
Sure. I'm not sure I have a whole lot to add to that, but yes, if we went back and kind of incorporated the carbon dioxide from wood burning, it would change the 1990 baseline and it would adjust all of the targets and the proportionality accordingly. And I have not done that analysis, but as Jane mentioned, I have done kind of some supplemental information in the back of the inventory that does speak to kind of if you were to count all those emissions fully, kind of at the stack. In terms of Maine, Jane, I don't know if I can't recall if I heard them speak to electricity generation specifically. I know they definitely included it for like the residential component. It may be in there for electricity. I'm not positive about that, and I don't know how much electricity generation from wood combustion they have in Maine. I'm just not familiar with it, but just to flag that as well.
Right, Richard.
The first sentence of number 5, I think, is what the IPCC recommends to countries and state and sub-country jurisdictions doing assessments of their greenhouse gases. This is exactly what we're supposed to do.
Other thoughts or questions about this, Chase?
And I just would sort of add that my understanding is in academic circles among the folks who study this stuff and have made this their career, my understanding is this is the trend, that this type of accounting methodology for biogenic sources is becoming more and more accepted as the preferred way to do things.
Other comments or questions on number 5?
I will just add that we just finished a complete draft of the Addison County greenhouse gas inventory, and I would very much have liked to be able to do what is described here for Addison County. We instead used a global warming potential bio to assess the greenhouse gas emissions of burning wood for heat in our county. But I would love to have been able to do the kind of analysis that is described in this first sentence.
Again, I'm fine with all this. I just wasn't clear how it's squared with our current inventory methodology and the legally binding targets of the Global Warming Solution Act. So if there's a plan and a clear process to reconcile those things, I have no problem.
So recognizing there will probably be some thoughts from the data subcommittee, maybe some thoughts from the council on this. I think from this group, anybody object to leaving this in your recommendations to the?
I just have a question. Are we asking the newly formed task group to do this, or the climate council? Who are we asking to do this?
Who is the actor here? Good question, Judy.
The Agency of Natural Resources is responsible for the greenhouse gas inventory.
It should be the state, whoever is managing the inventory, I guess.
So maybe we should say the state should assess GHG emission, make it more definitive. The state should assess GHG emissions at the point of combustion, so we don't have the passive voice.
I guess I just have one other question on that, and that is that I'm not sure it totally makes sense to make that statement for electricity and not all of biomass. I feel like it would be a little bit odd to only account for that for electricity generation and to leave the rest of the thermal sector accounted for the way it is accounted for now. So I guess that's something for you all to kind of contemplate.
Adam, to the Colin's point or another point?
Yeah, I mean, I'm okay with this, I guess, mostly because it doesn't actually specify how you're weighting the GHG impacts of emissions there. So if you're saying like account for all biogenic CO2 emissions at the stack, then I can't support this. As written, I can. I just want to clarify that this is vaguely written. It sounds like someone else will determine what level of global warming potential, value to assign to those emissions at the stack.
And I think there's probably a whole complicated protocol for doing so. And Richard mentioned the IPCC shifting and so maybe to Adam's point, maybe a little bit of vagueness here is good, partly because we'd have to get into a long discussion about how accounting is done and the methodologies and all that. I'm curious to Colin's point, whether we want to leave it electricity generation at this point and just be silent on thermal writ large, recognizing for Colin's sake, he would have some concern. What do people think about the electricity specific comment? Chase.
I think Colin's point is well taken. To the extent we wanted to provide clarity, we could delete those words. I'd be curious. I mean, Colin, I think that you're thinking on this is important. And so I'd be curious to know what you think.
Sure, I guess. I don't know. I feel like this gets into all these really complicated issues that we've all been wading through, and I'm not sure, frankly, if there is a total right answer. I think as you mentioned, Chase, that a lot of people are trending that way in terms of counting those gross emissions, but if we do end up moving to kind of a net number rather than a gross, and I'm not saying that's where we're going, but then that would kind of be double counting. Maybe we could address that if we ever got there. But that's kind of that tricky point. And I guess it also kind of gets at Adam's point as to do you account for these as full GWP one emissions, or do you assign some partial value like Richard has suggested, a GWP bio value that I think is interesting and tries to get at the difference between kind of the biogenic and the at least more renewable than fossil fuels. And so are you totally disincentivizing wood if you put it as a full accounting, or do we think it's better than fossil? And so because it's in kind of currently the more active carbon pool, at least, then taking it out of the geologic carbon pool, and is that better or not on our timeframes? I'm not sure what the answer to that is, but I guess all that to say is that it's just a complicated issue, but those are some of my things that are swirling around in my head on it.
Richard.
Yeah, I do think it's important to keep a distinction between wood burned to generate electricity and wood burned for heat. The efficiency of the latter, although not great, is a lot better than the efficiency for the former. If you burn wood to generate electricity and then use the electricity to heat your house, there's at least two transformations there. Whereas when you burn wood directly to heat your house, there's only one. And that's the basic answer for why it's so inefficient to use wood to generate electricity. So in the presentations that we heard, for example, from Dr. Rooney Vargas from UMass Lowell, the efficiency of the wood burning was an important factor in their model.
Chase.
I think your point is well taken, that there's a difference between the efficiency for electricity generation and for thermal applications when it comes to burning wood. I do think, though, as far as greenhouse gas emissions accounting goes, we'd want to use the same methodology across the board. And the emissions measured under whatever measures is used would then reflect the different efficiency levels. They'd sort of be captured in the final number. So I guess I'll harken back to what I said before, which I sort of framed as a bit of a question to Colin. And I'd be interested in deleting the words electricity generation here, since what we're talking about is just greenhouse gas emissions accounting. And as far as methodologies go, I agree with what I heard Colin say earlier, that it'd be odd to have two different metrics, one for electricity and one for thermal. We should just have one across the board. So that would be my suggestion, delete those words.
Colin, any reaction to that? Then I'll go to Judy.
I would agree that I think it would be good to keep it consistent. I'm not going to take a position on whether or not I think we should necessarily account for them and the gross total or not, but I do agree with Chase that I think that's the way that people are tending to be thinking about this, and that Maine is thinking about it, but yeah, I'm not going to put out kind of an official position for us on it.
Nope, totally fair. Judy, then Billy.
I agree with that, but I also have a question. Would this be the place where we would ask for assessment of particulate matter?
I think we do that further below. I mean, Judy, are you talking about like thermal writ large?
Nope, I'm like talking about measuring particulate matter for health issues for the people who are living there.
So I think under 6 and 7 covers that in a fair amount of detail. So we want to get at very specifically those neighborhoods and those plans. So 6 and 7 cover that. I
The
think.
assessment of?
I believe we have, we can go back and look at this. We may need to say, we say air quality. I'm not sure we say particulates in particular. Sorry for the things. We may want to add that to that.
Okay.
And we can make just note of that. Billy.
I don't mean to belabor this, but is this sort of analysis that we're calling for number 5 going to be explored through the life cycle greenhouse gas analysis contract that the council has authorized, or is that different than what is being discussed here?
Jane, can you answer that?
I'm hoping Colin can speak to that in detail, but I think this is different because, yeah.
Colin,
So like if that group has done more work and like really flesh this out, then it might be good to just defer and achieving the same general outcome. It might be good to defer to that. But if they are substantially different, then I'm fine.
The life cycle analysis is envisioned to be supplemental. This is actually speaking to incorporating it directly into the inventory. But there likely is a connection, Billy, and maybe there's a way to thread that.
Not worth the changing, but thank you.
Richard.
Yeah, this first phrase on number 5, the state should assess GHG emissions from wood biomass at the point of combustion. I think what is of interest is the GHG emissions per unit energy. It's not the total that is of greatest interest here, is it?
And Chase, I don't remember, Chase, did you? I think this is trying to maybe be on the leading edge of assessment, and that it's it is overall emissions, but I don't know whatever the efficiencies might be depending on the method.
I think that, a more efficient form of combustion would meet the energy needs with less combustion. And so then the emission assessment would reflect that efficiency. And so the final, emissions calculation have in that way efficiency embedded in it, but it wouldn't otherwise distinguish. You wouldn't have like a different GWP bio, for example, for like one form for one application versus another in this scenario. You just measure emissions at the point of combustion. More efficient combustion would have lower emissions overall because you need less energy to meet the needs. And then separately, you'd measure sequestration in the budget. So you essentially have it'd be like balancing a checkbook. You'd have your debits and your credits, and you'd measure the two in their separate columns, and then you could look at both to figure out sort of what the overall picture is.
Thank you, Chase. And that's fine. I agree with you. What I don't want to see happen is for people to do calculations for, say, modern wood stoves, and then apply those to fireplaces, or to, on the one hand, or to wood burning electric plants on the other.
And Richard, any thoughts about adding a clause or something in here to help do that, or you think it's covered as written?
I'm fine leaving it as is. I'm just trying to fix that. I think might make it worse. So I'm just.
But I think, again, there would be a lot of detail that has to be worked out here, including, Richard, the point you just made and Chase was trying to clarify.
Or maybe we could say GHG emissions from various technologies for wood burning. I
mean, you could say from wood biomass. Yeah, that's right. Various technologies. There we go. Go for it. Various technologies
for
utilized.
burning wood biomass.
Thanks, Jane. Okay, how's that, Richard? That help? How's that good?
You know, now you can take the wood back out. Now that biomass is there. Thank you. I appreciate the responsiveness.
Right. Colin, then Adam, and then I want to kind of maybe see where we're at with this paragraph and go to after addressing Judy's point. I want to get to that too.
Sorry, Adam, I'll be quick. I guess I did just want to flag that the way this is written now, the second part of the first sentence and the GHG sequestration should be assessed in the carbon budget so that those different numbers can be compared accurately over time. I feel like that is a little bit problematic because that sequestration value in the carbon budget is based on the kind of stock change in the forests annually. And so that is what you are in theory capturing. That is going to kind of be double counting of the gross emissions that you are planning to count in the first part of that sentence.
Yeah, it has to be moved out of the land base to the electric sector. It can't, it has to be in one or the other. Currently, this is accounted for in the land-based emissions. Sorry to jump in, Colin.
No, that's fine. And it is. Where it gets weird is that so far we have not, like, we don't technically, we have that information for the land use sector, some of it, but it's not really included in our official inventory totals. And so that's where you get that kind of weird disconnect that makes this also difficult. But I guess I'll also just say that, like, the kind of accuracy and granularity of that land use data is not nearly as reliable as kind of some of the more, I don't know, like, for example, fuel use, but even wood combustion, I think, is a more kind of solid number, even though that has a lot of uncertainty in it as well. The land use change data is just not particularly accurate at this point because it needs very kind of fine spatial data sets and, like, essentially satellite data telling you what has changed and how much carbon has left or been added to a landscape over the whole state to kind of come up with that number. So it's not straightforward.
Colin, any suggestions to the language here right now, given that concern?
Well, I think if you want to add the gross, if you want to add the biogenic emissions to the gross totals, I think you're going to have to keep that kind of sequestration piece as a separate supplemental kind of piece of information that is good to know, but does not directly connect with that kind of the first component. And I'd have to think a little bit about that language, I think.
I mean, Jane, I'm not sure this works, but then I'll go to Adam. I'm we're running past time. Is that we could just say point of combustion period, and then GHG sequestration should be assessed so the different numbers can be compared accurately, and we won't say where it should be assessed, and then you can figure out the accounting later. So I was trying to get Colin to your point, so we don't lose the idea, but we don't try to figure out exactly how to do it. Colin, does that kind of address your concern?
I think so. Let me just look at it quickly. Yeah, I think that's fine.
Adam.
I think I'm all set. Colin just addressed the issue that I wanted to raise, is that paragraph as previously worded didn't work because because of the double counting. And I think we just got there. So good.
Can anybody not live with number 5? Okay, I want to just address Judy's final point on particulates before we go to public comment. So Jane, in 6 or 7, I think we could mention particulates explicitly. I'm just not quite sure where. Let's see. I don't know whether we could say exposed to ambient emissions. Let's see. Yeah, go for it. See what you think makes sense.
Do you want me just to add a comment, public health explicit to particulates, or?
And Judy, what would be helpful to you, Judy, to make sure we mention particulates explicitly?
Well, that first one talked about accurately assessing, and that's what we need to do. We have to accurately assess particulate matters at the smokestack and where the people are.
I think that's what this one is. Number 7 is all about that. So let's make sure that's what we were trying to do with number 7. So let's make sure it's doing it. We spent a bunch of time on this one last week. So change this one where we were talking about public health and the Department of Public Health, I should say, sorry.
Jane, can I make a suggestion that if what we're trying to monitor here is air quality, then we could just say more public health and air quality monitoring in the first sentence. And I just want to point out that, I mean, there's more than just particulate matter emissions from burning biomass that I think are of concern from a public health perspective. So I don't know that it makes sense to single that pollutant out in particular. There's a whole host of them, so.
Okay.
Judy, what if we added that thing about public health and air quality in that last one? Does that help?
I mean, I think that's what we're proposing is air quality monitoring, really. So I think it makes sense to add that.
Yeah, I mean, do we need to be specific? Because it's not happening now at the top of the smokestack or where the people are.
So there is continuous emission monitoring going on at McNeil because it's a Title V facility. So I just wanted to clarify that. But I mean, I think that in talking about designing and implementing an air quality study, and if you're doing that in conjunction with the Air Quality and Climate Division and the Department of Public Health, both of those entities have expertise in designing and implementing studies that are particularly, you know, targeted at understanding the ambient air quality surrounding those facilities. So I feel like the language that we have here is robust enough to address, I think, what you're looking to have happen, Judy.
Yeah, well, I'm looking for change to happen, not status quo.
Yeah, and so I think that the monitoring that is being proposed here, it would be something that's obviously in addition to the air quality monitoring that currently occurs throughout the state, and then also at the
Yeah, but Megan,
the
it's
facility.
monitoring is happening now. It's not sufficient. They need to change the monitoring.
Right, and I think that number 7 represents a change.
I don't.
So Judy, let's word it so it's stronger than in that regard. So I don't know whether additional, much more substantive. I don't know what the right words are, but something to make it more clear that it's a change. So Judy, do you have thoughts about how we can make that wording stronger?
Or additional public health and air quality monitoring must occur in and around the neighborhoods adjacent to McNeil might do it.
Additional is good because then it's very specific. It's adding on what's there. And maybe if people are okay, Judy, the word I think we used elsewhere for other purposes is the word immediate. So rather than, you know, that this additional public health air quality must occur immediately in and around neighborhoods, or as immediately as possible, or whatever the right words are, just to put making it more.
Do you want more additional or additional instead of more substantial?
I want additional, and I want it to happen immediately.
Maybe we put it, yeah, there we go.
Must occur immediately. I'll just put that there.
Great. Richard,
Can we say as soon as practicable?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, how would you feel about that if you lived there?
Judy, I'm just trying to speak to the fact that I think we want to engage the right expertise and process in designing and implementing an air quality monitoring study that's going to, inform the conversation from a reliable and appropriate perspective.
let me go to Richard and Liz, and then we'll come back to see where we're at with this. So Richard and Liz.
Has the Vermont Department of Health yet had an opportunity to react to this?
Jane, I think the answer is no, but
I haven't shared it with them, but I'm more than happy to. And what maybe as we move this up through the hierarchy, the process, we should clearly invite the Science and Data Subcommittee in addition to the Just Transition Subcommittee into the conversation, and we have representation on science and data from public health.
They have been a part of this conversation, though. They're aware of it.
How do you
Yeah,
know
they
that,
just haven't-
Judy?
Because I've talked to the Department of Health.
Yeah, they came to speak with us, but they should just see this language.
I'm also happy, sorry to interrupt you, Patrick. I just want to say I'm also happy to invite our air monitoring section from DEC, who obviously has a lot of expertise in designing and implementing air quality monitoring studies, to explain, the process that could potentially unfold here. So happy to do that as well.
Liz, go ahead.
I was going to raise something that might be similar. I would not support the first sentence as drafted because it's presuming that it must occur as opposed to recommending to the expert agencies that they consider, conducting. In other words, I'm not qualified, and I would suggest that our task group is not qualified to require this study. So I would suggest we either leave kind of the latter half of that paragraph, which gets to that relevant state agencies should be engaged to design and implement, and you could have it be any targeted air monitoring or public health. You could broaden that sentence to include the public health monitoring. And that would strike me as something that is appropriate and I could support. Thanks.
And I just, sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to say that I really appreciate that, Liz, because I also acknowledge that our monitoring folks in our air quality section are, completely stretched thin and don't have the resources to take on any additional work right now.
Chase and then Judy.
I guess I'm just, I appreciate Megan, what you just said, especially about the limitations on staff and capacity right now. I think that there are probably policy solutions to those types of limitations, which are not easy to achieve, and we may not want to consider them here, but perhaps additional money in the budget for additional help at DEC, additional employees could be a potential solution there. But really what I wanted to say here is that I'm concerned that if we delete that first sentence because of status quo limitations, then we'd be missing the aspiration that it contains, that we can do better and that we should do better for the people who are impacted by the public policy decisions that we make, who aren't actually at the table to influence those decisions. And so I understand that there are different factors at play here, and it's not necessarily easy. But that initial sentence, I think, does some important work, even if it's going to be difficult to implement. And so I'd be really open and happy if we could discuss ways to make it feasible, to make it occur, and happy to try to help figure that out.
Let me go to Judy, and then I think we're going to pause, take public comment, and go to the subcommittee to leave time, as Jane just put in the chat. So Judy, go ahead. Oh, Judy, you're on mute.
I would not change as soon as practical. I would leave it as immediate because we're talking about a health issue. We're not talking about who has time and who doesn't. When we're talking about a health issue, we need to act on it. And I think the task committee that is formed needs to understand they need to act on it.
So I know we're not done with number 7. What I do want to do is pause, give a chance for public comment, and then go to subcommittee questions and comments. So
Jane, could you put immediate back in there, please?
I'm talking to
I will
myself.
flag it and put it in parentheses.
Okay, great.
But I feel like the whole sentence needs to
Yeah,
work
well,
still, so
yeah, I think just put the whole paragraph in yellow. We're gonna have to work on it. And we can have both choices there. Okay, so I'd like to go to public comment and then subcommittee comment. So is there any member of the public who would like to make a comment before I go to subcommittee comment? And Jane, maybe we stop sharing the screen just so we can see folks.
yeah, and then just I would encourage just a 2-minute pause for a bathroom break, which we had built into the agenda because it is a long meeting, 3 hours. So let's take public comment and then pause for just 2 to 5 minutes and then
Totally
come back.
fair. I ran right past that break, no problem. Any public comments at this time? Okay, let's do this. Let's take Cheryl, Joy, over to you.
Yeah, why don't you take the break and then do public comment so everybody can focus?
Why don't we do this? It's 10:20 now. Let's take a break till 10:25. We'll do public comment and then subcommittee comment for probably the remainder of the time, and then discussion between the subcommittee and the task group, or subcommittees and task groups. So 10:25 return, 5-minute bio break. See you in 5. Thanks, Jane.
I'm going to pause recording, so please remind me to restart when we get back.
Just for the recording, we're just waiting to come back from break, and so there may be a pause in the recording briefly before we go.
I did start recording again.
Great, thanks, Jane. I just said
I
that.
ran. I heard you.
No problem. And I think Cheryl, Joy, are you with us yet?
Yeah, hi.
Okay, over to you. Public comment.
Is everybody back?
People are slowly coming back as they put on their cameras. I think everybody now can put on their cameras, subcommittee and task group, because we're going to kind of engage in a conversation among the subcommittee and task group. So would be good. All right, Cheryl, Joy, go ahead.
Oh, all right. Well, it doesn't look like everybody's back, but I'll go ahead and talk anyway. So one thing is that I really do wish that, and said it before, that I wished that there was an ecologist on this task group, and there, people are doing a lot of work, and it really would have been a good addition. And that was supposed to happen, but it didn't. It's hard to talk about whether it should. I think that you guys really have had a lot of information, and I wish that you had more teeth into the statement that you're making, and I wish you would just commit. And you've seen the fact that what we're doing and what everybody is doing around the world is not enough. And you're moving very slowly and not committing to grand, big changes that need to happen. And it's really, the current science shows that it's not right to burn wood and to combust anything. And I'm just going to be really basic because there's a ton to say. There have been a lot of kind of myths being talked about. Keeping forest as forest isn't enough. Forest has to be much more healthy than it has been. The forest that we have is sequestering and storing a very small amount. And if it was left to grow older, and if it was like it was prior to the deforestation of the 1800s, then we wouldn't be in the mess we're in. Well, I mean, that would definitely help to not have us be in this mess. After all this time, 8 months, 9 months, it seems like you're just wanting to study more, and nobody's really stepping up to the plate and saying what is right in front of our faces, which is we need to stop combustion, and we need to move and transition away from it and help the forest products industry and the loggers, et cetera. But we got to stop doing what we're doing. You know, keeping forest as forest isn't enough. And it's unhealthy, no matter what we burn for, no matter what the reason is. And there, even among the foresters that presented to the task group, it has been blatantly obvious that the biomass burning is not the answer. We cannot keep status quo. And this is what I see a bunch of people trying to make happen. And so what used to be a statement has been watered down over and over and over again. And it's not enough. It's better than what it was. It's not as good as what it could be, and it's not enough. So we need to change the way we're doing things. Status quo isn't enough, and I see that that's what's happening. And it has to do with cutting and burning wood. It doesn't have to do with what we use it for, etc. So there's a ton more that I could say. And, you know, I'm giving a talk in a week. Everybody's invited to come to it with a couple of other people, talking about these common forestry myths that you guys, that some people are using here. And I just think you guys need to pay attention to what you've realized and found from the presenters and from what the current science is. People who are using biomass and increasing are all now backpedaling around the world, realizing what a damaging and disastrous situation it is. So I'm not going to go into details, but I think you're making a mistake. And it was a lot of work.
Cheryl, can you share a link to those myths for us?
Sure, I'll put it in the chat, and I will also send another paper for.
And Cheryl, if you put it in chat, if it's okay with everybody, then I can make that available to everybody. Via.
Do you want me to send it to you?
No, just put it in chat. It'll come just to me or Jane, and then we can put it in chat for everybody.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Any other public comment? Okay. Thanks, Cheryl Joy. All right. I want to turn to subcommittee members. So subcommittee members, please feel free to have your screens on, all of you, as well as the task group. And welcome, comments I think this is really a discussion. If you have comments or thoughts you just want to hear the task group to hear, great. If we have questions or the like, I think we'll have a discussion, and we'll just kind of carry that on for a bit until until we're a little closer to our end time, and then we'll do next steps. Jane?
Yeah, just from a process standpoint, I did update the clean version that's on today's website. It shows the most up-to-date version from the changes this morning. So you can look on that way if folks want to see everybody's faces, or I'm happy to share the document again and go through it one by one, which is what the suggestion I had made on the agenda was. But just look to you all for guidance on that.
Great. Thanks, Jane. So subcommittees, questions, comments, over to you all. I'll jump in at once.
I think given how the agenda was presented, I came, just at 10 o'clock here. I came to the last meeting and listened into some of it, thinking I was going to get to participate actually, but I couldn't. So, and then I came at 10 o'clock here with the expectation that we'd just kind of go one by one through this and kind of have an explanation of the task group's thinking so that we could go through this. And I was hoping that we could actually do that, because I am not prepared to otherwise, comment without having some of that iteration. But I don't know if everybody else is in the same spot, but that's why I haven't chimed in generally.
TJ, I think I hear you thought about going one by one. I think the group has had let me just say this, and the group certainly can speak for themselves, is that it's been hard work to get to the language on paper. Then the language speaks for itself on behalf of the subcommittee, and as much as we're not to full consensus yet, we haven't tested it yet. So I think if we were to go through each one, we might be kind of relitigating our commentary we had to get there before, which may be useful for the subcommittees. I don't know. I just want to note that. I do think we can certainly in a minute here. Let me go to Jared, and then we can figure out a way to address it, TJ, to try to address your concerns to kind of build your understanding as we go.
We could invite feedback though, one by one, even without
Yes, definitely.
litigate. And
That-
we could,
absolutely. Jane, that's a good point. Maybe that's the way to do it, is to invite feedback from the subcommittee on as we go through each of these, and maybe that's a way, TJ, to kind of be a little more methodical about it. So let me go to Jared, and then maybe we can take up TJ's suggestion.
First, I just want to thank everybody who's been involved with this. I know that these are complex and difficult conversations, and that people have been putting in a lot of time over the months, and I just really appreciate that. There's two kind of broad things that I want to comment on, and I'm actually not sure I'm looking at the most current version of the document. I see it on the screen. So what I'm going to offer may not be as relevant as it may have been before, but I think as an overall, I hope it's helpful. The first is that I say this as a member of the Science and Data and Cross-Sector Mitigation Subcommittees, I would really encourage us to try to disentangle and not conflate the definitions and ideas of renewability and of carbon intensity or lower GHG emitting. I think that a challenge is, like I'll just put in the chat here, for instance, the definitions of renewable energy that the EIA, the Federal Energy Information Administration, uses. I think it's fairly straightforward and things are more or less renewable on different timescales, but I don't think the overall definition of renewability is one that is kind of that up for debate. But I do think that the emissions and the carbon intensity and how GHG emitting different renewable resources is certainly up for debate, and they differ. And so I would just encourage that we not conflate those ideas, and to be consistent with the Global Warming Solutions Act, that we talk about less carbon intensive energy sources or lower greenhouse gas emitting. So it looks like, if I'm seeing the screen recently, I was originally speaking to this in terms of point 3, where it talked about other renewable resources. It looks like that's been taken out. I think that that's appropriate, because when we talk about emissions, I think we should be talking about greenhouse gas emissions or carbon intensity, not whether or not something is renewable. The other thing that I would just offer as a kind of a broad point is my sense from listening to this conversation, and my personal opinion, is that if and when there are lower emitting energy alternatives to biomass-based electricity or wood heating, it is ideal for those to be used instead. One of the concerns I do have, however, is that I wonder if we have enough appreciation of the question, the real world practical question of compared to what. And when I think about the electricity system, theoretically, the ideal is we would not, over the long term, have biomass-based electricity generation. But what I would not want to see is a situation where we call for that when the practical alternative in terms of a firm power resource would be something like fossil gas, which is equally as problematic or more problematic from an environmental justice perspective, from a pollution perspective, from an emissions perspective, or from something like nuclear power, those 24/7 resources that would immediately be able to replace it. I think we need to wrestle with and recognize that. And I believe that some members of the committee, hopefully the whole committee, is doing that. And I think the same goes on the heating side. I think ideally we all agree that long-term we should get as much of our heating needs as possible met through weatherization and efficiency and low carbon electricity. And I recognize that heating was not as much of a focus of this work group and is only touched on briefly later on. But again, I would not want to see a situation where we speak to things that are kind of divorced from the reality of Vermont's kind of climate, building stock, to speak to and single out wood as a resource in a way that could further embed or advantage fossil fuels, which create huge problems. So I just hope and appreciate that as we continue these conversations, we look consistently, transparently, rigorously across the board at all sources, and don't pick one out with the perhaps unintended and really problematic consequences of giving cover to an even worse and more polluting option that may happen in its stead in the near to medium term. Whereas I do think that at long term, we all agree that we want to get towards as much of our heating and electricity met through efficiency and zero or as close to zero as possible emissions resources. But there is the path from here to there as well that I appreciate us all wrestling with. But that's all to say thank you for the work. I've appreciated following this conversation and look forward to going through more point by point, but the extent to which we can disentangle renewability with emissions, and the extent to which we can focus on the compared to what question, and not just have a theoretical conversation, are things that I really hope we continue to emphasize. Thank you.
And Jared, just one note in the subcommittee I want to comment is we had a lot of presenters and a lot of that conversation was precisely to that question as compared to what. So there was a lot of back and forth around some of those discussions and issues for sure. Obviously not captured in the details of this document here. Joanna.
Thank you, Patrick. And more so just echoing Jared's appreciation. I just really want to thank all of you for spending so much time and thinking about these really important issues. And I just would say a few things because I'm still trying to, really listen and learn from the conversation that you just had and, be able to respond to the words on the page and what that means and wrap my head around it. But I very much appreciate the work. It's obviously really important and it's really important to get right. I very much want to echo and underscore the two, sort of pieces of input and recommendations that Jared gave. Those feel also very important to me to sort of not focus on renewability, but, across the board on greenhouse gas emissions and carbon intensity. And then, yes, again, compared to what I think is really important. And so I did not benefit from those conversations that you just underscored, Patrick, but I really, again, just want to sort of sit with these and understand and wrap my head around like what that means, the implications of it. And then also just wanting to make sure that we do further analysis and continue to do rigorous science-based work and the necessary public engagement around McNeil and in general. So one of the questions I have is to sort of what Megan was alluding to earlier, is there the capacity to continue to lift up this work and do the studies and analyses that are going to be needed? Maybe that question will be answered as we talk about the budget on Monday, but it feels important to me. It also feels important in terms of compared to what I haven't been able to focus as much in this conversation because we've been doing the transportation work, but I think there are some significant needs and I really want to make sure that there's the time and capacity to be able to focus there. So again, just underscoring the two and elevating the 2 points that Jared made. And I don't know in terms of going one by one, if I feel like maybe we can spend some time going one by one and offering input, but I feel like I need to sit with it a little bit more and maybe even go back into some of what you have already explored to be able to make an informed assessment. There's a lot here.
One, and I think both John and Jared's point for number 3, there was a lot of discussion in the subcommittee into crafting that, and that includes thinking about as these were phased out, what would be the base load replacement, the replacement for them, what are the alternatives for creating that much electricity somewhere else, including I think as compared to what point that Jared raised, for sure, and then what those subsequent replacement methods were in terms of GHG emissions. The two things that the subcommittee hasn't fully figure, the task group hasn't fully sorted out what to do, trying to focus on clear recommendations of the Vermont Council. There is some very opening general language we haven't vetted with the full task group yet, just kind of that gives a general background and covers the issue very, very broadly. We did try to develop some very detailed findings and from all of the presentations, and realized that that was going to take a ton of work to have the group come to agreement on, which is why we focused on the findings, on the recommendations. But it does mean that recommendations kind of stand without some of that context for sure that Joanna and Jared, I think, raised. So just to let the subcommittees know.
Patrick, can we comment, or do you
Yeah,
want to?
no, you go right. You go right in.
So I'd like to comment on what Johanna and Jared both said. First off, I think, I might be wrong, but I think in part because I'm on this task force, there has been a lot of direction on equity and being inclusive, which we were told to do. And so after listening to all of the speakers for the last 8 months, some of us have not agreed with that definition of renewable. Consequently, the discussions of compromise is what you saw today. And the whole purpose around that is to be inclusive and equitable. And I think you would have to have listened to all of the speakers we've listened to understand that, because we have benefited a lot from what we've learned from those people, and how important it is to be inclusive to all perspectives. And we've worked hard to come to agreement and consensus on these recommendations, and to put them on a shelf because we're arguing over the definition of renewable is wrong, because the definition of renewable has played a big role in equity and inclusivity. Thank you.
Judy, thank you. Other task group members want to comment so far on Johanna and Jared's comments yet? And I'll check back in on how we kind of proceed with discussion here. Any other task group remarks right now? Richard.
I admire Jared's clarity and thoughtfulness in this. There are twin dangers. I mean, one danger is that we phase out burning wood and phase in something that's even worse, and we don't want to do that. The other danger is that we invest in burning wood when we could be investing in something cleaner. And I think we need to take account of both dangers.
Great, Richard, thanks. So a question, I'm going to turn to the subcommittees. I think some might take us, some subcommittee members, as Jana said, maybe aren't ready to go one by one because they need to kind of sit with the document. For folks like TJ, it actually might be helpful. So do we want to kind of go through them one by one, subcommittee members? Do you want to have a more general discussion? So I kind of turn to subcommittees. This is your time to get what you need from the task group from this document. So and we are recording this, right, Jane? Yeah, we are. So TJ, go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess I'm going to start on number 2. I think number 1 is pretty straightforward. But I just have a question for the task group in how you may have discussed this in the context, particularly for McNeil, but also Reigate, in terms of using the waste heat from the facility and the impacts of that, positive and negative. And in doing that, if there was a change in the, rated capacity of the facility, how does that all, how did you discuss that, and how did it kind of play into this recommendation? This is my question. And I think this maybe plays a little bit off of Jared's comment as to compared to what, because if we're comparing to displacing a natural gas, or is it renewable natural gas, or is it, there's a whole list of to what. I see that's further down in the recommendations, like you mentioned, but the real question is, like, how did you think about, like, the potential for using the facilities in a different way, if at all.
Does task group members want to respond to that? So I've got to see Judy's hand up. Judy, go for it.
We had people present to us about the health issues it's causing, being the largest polluter in the state, disrupting their wanting to increase for heat would be disrupting archaeological sites, highly sensitive archaeological sites on the state register. And we considered that, plus many, many other things. The lack of monitoring where the people live, the fact that the EPA is showing a decrease in visits to the hospital for COPD attacks and asthma attacks. It's now impacting 10-year-old kids. We considered for Rygate, their discussion about bankruptcy. We considered all of those things, and I'm sure people have other things to say.
And can other
Jane, TJ, can I make? Sorry, I can't raise my hand when I'm sharing my screen, but just in specific context to the thermal application, which we can look at down on the recommendations. I just want to comment that this language to increase the currently permitted hourly output capacity, and your expertise actually would be, or Liz has raised her hand too, was sort of carefully crafted, if I remember correctly, to get at the fact that what we heard from specifically about McNeil was that they would not go outside of their currently permitted hourly capacity based on their current study, that 4% increase potentially would be within that. So I just want to, we discussed that, and that's how that language, and then the considerations around the study are really outlined down in 3.
Liz, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, and just the other thing to note, this was a paragraph that didn't have, I think this, Judy had mentioned it earlier on a different subject. This was the sentence that I said, like, I didn't agree with or I wasn't sure what expanded meant. And given the thermal discussion, I think this is where I said, look, I'll just stand aside if everyone else agrees with it. It is in tension, in my view, with the thermal discussion further down. So I agree with Jane that the discussion was around keeping both plants within their currently permitted electric generating capacity and what that means. That's also the reason why I didn't pass one way or the other on the second sentence, because of the interaction with thermal. So I don't know if it's worth noting, but this is not a 100% consensus on the committee.
Other people want to comment on the thermal application for McNeil in particular, and I certainly can summarize a few additional points in addition to the ones that were made, but anybody else from the task group first?
Yeah, I wanted to say that I think we tried to find that point where there could be a thermal application within not expanding beyond a certain point. And we may have failed on that, but that we thought about that, TJ, and we tried to accomplish that, at least in the first sentence of 2. But as Liz indicated, we may not have nailed it.
And we don't all agree.
I think the other distinction in number 2 was just the difference between increasing its physical footprint in terms of the nameplate capacity of being a 50 megawatt power plant versus operating more hours out of the year, that we wanted to specify what that actually meant, and to not say, like, if they're only operating 4,000 hours out of the year, that they can't go to 6,000 hours out of the year. We were very mindful of using language that was more about the maximum hourly output capacity.
Thanks for those clarifications. I guess my comment is, in my question was really around if we're drawing a box and putting ourselves in it, we want to make sure we're intentional about it. And it sounds like there's some debate, perhaps still, or debate may not be the right word, maybe lack of consensus about exactly what that box should be. And so I think this is helpful to kind of get a sense of the thinking and what people have thought about of the thermal applications here.
Chase, did you have a response to TJ, and then I'll go to Jared? But Chase, do you have any other thoughts on number 2?
Only to say that I think that number 2 was a compromise, and to the extent that there wasn't consensus, the language that's contained here was at least such that the group could move forward with it. And so I just wanted to pull that up and point out that a lot of discussion went into this, and this was where the process landed. And
I think for just a slightly more, then I'll go to Jared, is I think the group had a long conversation. I think as folks have noted, you've heard the range of views. I think we did reach out to the facilities and had a conversation with them, which we appreciated them coming. There's questions around kind of expansion in terms of physical plant and how we do with, say, cultural resources. There's concerns about expansion in terms of wood use, what do we do to forest, and concerns about expansion in terms of emissions. So expansion was something we discussed in kind of a variety of fronts. I think there is probably some skepticism, given that the thermal application has been on the books for 40 years but hasn't happened, that people aren't sure how real it is. So that's been a hard debate to know exactly what to do with the certainty or the probability of that. But within that, people have discussed a range of views, including even if the electricity went away, but the thermal remained, as you heard this morning, there would still be concerns about that existing plant just for thermal alone in terms of potential impacts, such as GHG, but also just emissions, the neighborhood, sort of equity, and kind of impacts to physical plant and the surrounding neighborhood as well. Jared, over to you.
Not to be too much of a copy editor on this, but I do think that the intent and clarity of that first sentence, right now it's a little bit unclear without some punctuation, and I'll give an example. I think that sentence means very different things if there's a comma after capacity versus if there's a comma after expanded and then again after physically. I think based on the conversation, what is intended is the idea of not being expanded to increase the currently permitted hourly output capacity, comma, physically or otherwise. And so I would encourage that insertion of punctuation for clarity's sake.
Great, Jared, thank you. Other comments about, and TJ, if you wanted to raise questions or comments on 1 through 8 or whatever it is at this point, TJ, if there are other specifics you wanted to raise, I'm happy to kind of talk about any number of these numbers here. Or anyone else, from the subcommittees who, yeah, TJ, go for it.
I guess I have another question on this 3, and if you scroll to the top of 3 here, and I see that the language is still highlighted there of the if and when, and I guess there's this language, I need to better understand it, because on its face, it seems conflicting to me, where it says the council recommends that the state do something, and then below it says, well, we need to consider whether it's a good idea to do this. And I think there's like planning and preparing for the phase out of generation at these old plants is something, like planning for decommissioning at some point, just like on the face, is not a bad thing. So like the language is not too concerning, but I just want to make sure that the language, I don't know, there's some inconsistency there to me when I read it on its face without having the benefit of all the conversations that have gone into this. And I was listening in last week when some of this was discussed, but so I guess I'm just going to ask again and leave it open, because I don't know what the right answer is here. I just want like a little more clarity there on, where you landed on the if and when, and does that align with that first sentence in 3?
TJ, just editor thing. We did earlier today land on the if and when, so we can probably take the yellow out because we landed on it, and then we did other work on the document as well. In terms of how it relates.
So that actually makes the question even more kind of relevant, I think, because if the if is staying in there, then I don't know how we can make the recommendation that we definitely do it. Those two things are not consistent, and so I feel like it's got to be one or the other. But I could be missing something, so please help me.
Let me try to parse where I think the group was, and the group should weigh in on top of me. I think that everyone recognizes you should prepare for the phase out, whether or not you think it's necessarily going to happen. That was carefully worded because there were other language that we couldn't come to a consensus on that this we could. Then as you look at the if, when, and how business is, I think some people think these plants should be phased out as soon as possible. Other folks in the group think they might be phased out, but I need to know more before I can say yes. And so that's the kind of if question, because people need to know about wood markets or replacement of the load or a number of things. And so people did agree that we need to prepare for phase out, but then the question is we need to really investigate the when and how, and that might lead to a question of if or not, depending on what the answer to some of the implications are that are in the bullets here.
So is it really that the council recommends that we prepare generally for the phase out of this, and then the investigation is whether or if, when, and how to phase out sooner than general? Is that the distinction?
Well, maybe I'll let the task group kind of weigh in on that for sure. It's a good question. Task group, any sense of kind of clarity here to TJ's point? Chase.
As one of the folks who was thinking about planning not only for the greenhouse gas emissions implications of the plant, but also the health implications and, the potential decommissioning of a plant because it reaches the end of its useful life and or other economic changes that could occur in the interim that might render them economically unviable. I am of the opinion that it would be good to proceed using the words when and how without the word if, but there's not agreement on that. And so there were other folks who wanted to include the word if. And noting the tension, TJ, that you just pointed out, which, I acknowledge, I think that there is some tension. I'm wondering if perhaps there's a solution where in that first bullet point, we could use the words when and how and potentially if. It doesn't completely absolve the tension because we're still using the word if, but we're saying potentially if, just noting that the emphasis is really on planning and preparing for a phase out because it's going to happen at some point anyways. So we should have a plan in place. We shouldn't just go into this blind without a plan. And so the plan should focus on when and how, but recognizing there are some folks who feel differently about that and want to obtain more information, perhaps using the word and potentially if could help thread the needle to help us find agreement on the language here.
And Chase, I'm going to let people go back and forth, but Jane will kind of keep some notes here, some additional potential language suggestions. So Bram, go ahead.
I don't necessarily see the if as in contradiction to the first statement, simply because of the points raised earlier that it is not immediately obvious to anyone that the electrical generation capacity of those plants could be replaced right now with something less harmful. There's the danger of replacing them with something more harmful, which I think we probably can get to consensus pretty easily that we don't want to replace it with something that's worse. So, I think that investigation of if is not if ever, it's if is there a way to do it now? And the answer may be no. The answer may be we need to build out X more renewable capacity before we have something that's a better alternative and can phase them out. So it doesn't bother me. And generally logic and grammar do bother me. So for whatever that's worth.
Bram, thank you. Other questions or comments on the point TJ had just asked, or other topics here? And Jane's just pointing out the last bullet there in terms of some of the, I think, to the effect of some of the issues people have raised.
Right. So I'm sorry to be kind of dense about this, but like the word immediately or soon, like that seems like the whole crux of the if and when, or maybe that's the when. So maybe it's in there. The investigation of it seems like we're doing it in the core of the paragraph, and then the first bullet is like we want to know if we want to do it immediately. And I think I'm parroting a little bit of what Bram just said, but in that, and then the rest of the bullets kind of go to what would be included in examining the impacts of doing it immediately, and that.
And I just want to
make sense, and I'm not sure why the word immediately wouldn't be in there or sooner, because that would like that's what I'm hearing is the intent of it, and I could be wrong.
Liz, go ahead.
Yeah, my memory is that immediately was supposed to modify when the study would be advanced rather than the recommendation around the plant. So if that's not evident to new readers, we need to consider fixing it.
Liz, that was my understanding.
Right. I was talking about should the word immediately be added into the first bullet, because I think it's clear that immediately means the study in that core paragraph there, but it's like we're going to plan for it, and then if it's just like the investigation, that whole bullet's duplicative if there's not like a timing element to it.
I agree with you, TJ. That's why the second bullet with the all the way up to 2050 with all those dates bothered me, because if the phase out takes till 2050, that's a lot of people that are going to get ill.
Liz, did you have another comment or just a
Yeah, I guess I just didn't see it that way. So I don't know if I speak for just myself or other task members, but saw the if, when, and how consistent with the next bullet of phase out or lack thereof. In other words, the study, it's not presuming the outcome of the study, including potentially the timeline throughout the GWSA timeline. So if there's a lack of clarity between those bullets and the intent of the study being open and available for those outcomes and the first sentence, then yeah, we may have a different issue. Was not the intention was not, at least in my view, to put that temporal aspect in the first sentence as TJ's hearing it.
And TJ, we did try a bit of a crack at some different scenarios, and I think the group quickly put those aside because it was going to be really hard to name which periods, and people had a range of views, and so we dropped that specific.
Okay. All right. So I think this is all helpful. I think with the benefit of this conversation, I can understand it a little better. I apologize for kind of diving into the weeds here, but I am. This is going to be used, and a lot of different people are going to read it going forward. So hopefully this is helpful. Forward.
No, TJ, so this is exactly this time for you all to ask questions just as you're asking. So totally appropriate. Other questions or comments from the subcommittee on the document?
Sorry, I'm going to keep going if nobody else. On number 4, the word heat is capitalized. Should explore the role of heat. Is that meaning, have some specific meaning there?
Jane, you want to go down to that? Jane's trying to manage multiple screens here, so give her a minute.
I'm looking away to the other document.
What number?
Number 4. Yeah. I think I think that was a remnant of a header. Jane, I don't know what you think. I think the capitalization was just the remnant of a header. So I think we probably just need to get rid of the caps.
I'm going to get rid of it capitalized for residential and commercial scale too. So that's all.
So I guess just to follow up, it's to further explore the role of heat as a climate solution, at scale, but is it some type of heat? Because I don't understand. I guess I don't understand what that is. It biomass, heat from biomass?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, that's probably obvious, but again,
yep, good. Yep. Good clarity. TJ, why don't I go to Jared and Joanna and then come back to you for additional comments as well? Anything else on number 4 you wanted to cover?
Just so you know, just a comment on this since we're on it real quick, is that this was bulleted because there were multiple bullets before, but I think now that we've taken a bullet away here, this should all be one paragraph. So I'm just going to put that out there.
And we needed to get to 5 this morning, so we didn't quite wrap up number 4. Okay, TJ, we're going to see something else on 4.
I guess. Sorry, Jared and Joey, but I guess I just want to be sure that, because I just kind of assumed biomass, but way back when there was other bio-based sources of heat, and if the task group may have moved on from this, and that's fine, but I just want to be clear that if the heat from biomass is the heat from biofuels, like all that, I think that language just needs to be specific, and biomass is specific, but I want to make sure, since we just added it, that it's meaning the right thing.
The Climate Council reduced our scope of work to not include biofuels.
Okay,
we have a definition of biomass for our purposes that we should probably get in here somehow, so it's explicitly clear what we're talking about.
We have that back in our scope, Bill. You're right. That's a good point.
Okay, thank you. Again, diving in without knowing the context. Go ahead, Jared and Joy.
Jared, you first.
Sorry, just to go back on number 3, and I think this also applies to 4. What I heard, correct me if I'm wrong, was a general agreement that when we do analysis, it should be in the context of compared to what, and I don't see that explicitly mentioned in 3. Like, it talks about the health, air quality, the third bullet in 3, the health, air quality. Sorry, can you scroll down just a little bit? Climate, cultural resources. Yeah, like to me, I would have more confidence calling for studies if I knew that it wouldn't just be about the implications of biomass on those factors, but as compared to available alternatives over different timelines, so that we have the full picture of what the pros and cons, costs and benefits, the trade-offs are. And I think that that's also a relevant point for number 4 for any studies that would happen. And I feel like if that's a generally agreed upon point, it should be explicit that we don't want to just look at one thing in isolation, because in order to understand whether it's preferable or not, or what the pros and cons or trade-offs are, I think we need to assess it in comparison to the available alternatives over different timescales.
Chase, go ahead.
I'm wondering, Jared, if we scroll down to the bottom of 3, the final bullet point there, I'm wondering if that does the work that you're asking for, and if not, perhaps I call out that this would be the space where an amendment could be made to do the work you're calling for.
I might just suggest that I think it'd be clearer if it's up front in the body rather than kind of at the end in one sub bullet point. If we say that, let me see, advanced evidence-based studies. I don't know. I'm sorry, I need a little bit more time to think about it, but maybe other brains that are quicker on the fly than I am, but that understand the intent. I kind of I jotted down the language as compared to available alternatives over different timescales, but I don't know exactly where to insert that. Maybe it's in that first bullet, actually. at the end of the sentence there, or the end of the line.
I mean, and that's good. Go ahead, Chase.
Sorry.
No, Chase, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I don't want to cut anyone else off. Perhaps we could move that bottom bullet point up. And we could either put it under the first one, or Jared, if I'm hearing you right, if you'd like the first bullet point to contain that type of representation, then perhaps a period could follow the word facilities, and then say something like, as part of that investigation, the study should clearly look at, et cetera, and then just plug in the text from that final bullet point. These are just ideas. I think that the intent behind that final bullet point was intended to do the kind of work that you were just describing. And to the extent it's not clear enough, I think that we can clarify that and move it around and do all that sort of stuff.
So Jane, for now, it's not like what you're doing. I think maybe why don't we move it up to the second bullet there? And then as Chase said, this task group could work on some language in that first bullet to Jared's concern. I do want to know if you all have the time and will to go back and listen to the presentations, there were many long discussions with many different technical experts about as compared to what, and how biomass compared against any number of choices, including the question of timescales and a very vigorous discussion about what that meant for forests, and all of those things, and payback from a kind of a standpoint or a woodlot or a landscape scale. So just to for what it's worth, though it's not in this document, there was a lot of discussion about this across a whole number of presenters. And one of the kind of key things people really tried to understand much better. Jared, anything else before we go to Johanna?
I would just say I don't have a problem with moving that up. I would just say that I don't think that second bullet fully captures it, because it's saying if we don't do this, what's the ramp up of the alternative? It sounds like that's kind of implying in terms of meeting the energy need or energy load that would be not be met in the same way, but that doesn't call for the same type of investigation on the type of things that are listed in the other bullet points in terms of if you can just scroll down, Jane, sorry, I think it's health impacts, air quality, climate, etc. To me, the important point is that we assess the source and the alternatives on the same factors.
So why don't we go to Johanna and just, I think maybe may have to do a little bit more thinking on given your comment, Jared, the task group may have to do a little more thinking about ultimately how we word a few of these things. Johanna?
No, I was going to raise a similar point, and I agree, and would be curious to work on wordsmithing a little bit, but generally that concept. If there was a specific presentation that a member of the biomass task group or two recommended that you think would be helpful to edify ourselves instead of, I would welcome input from any of you all about how to, what particular presentations you witness that would be helpful to hear. And then the other thing is, I'm just thinking about this work, and I know Judy, you noted the focus on is not on biofuels anymore, it's on biomass, but it feels like some of what we're talking about here obviously is related, and what it's related to, and what the science continues to say is that the combustion of stuff we need to stop combusting stuff, it's bad for public health, and we need to move in a different direction. And I just was trying to remind myself about how that shows up in terms of a sort of a strategy. I mean, it's showing up in our strategies, in some of the recommendations in the climate action plan. It may be helpful to just, put a finer point on it in a prelude to this, in terms of, just an acknowledgement that we need to sort of move away from combusting stuff on the exact time frame, 2025, 5, 10, 20 years when it comes to these particular plants, and biomass is an open question. We're going to examine that, but just in general, an acknowledgement of directionally at a higher level what we should be or not doing. It seems like it may be helpful in the climate action plan somewhere.
Yeah, we figured that out early on, Joanna,
Yeah.
but we were told to reduce our scope and leave out biofuels. And sometimes somebody would sneak into that direction and we were reminded it wasn't part of our scope of work.
Yeah, no, I get that. And I understand from like capacity wise why that may have been true. But I mean, if just in general, there are other conversations happening that I think that it's informs. So I don't know if there's a way to do it. I'm not trying to complexify, but I think that sort of tone setting could be helpful.
And one thing we could, to Billy's point,
Suggest that's something that the council can focus on, like that's a whole bigger conversation that transcends the scope of this group. I don't think you
I
should-
understand. That's why I
Don't-
led
don't
with
put that on
apologies
us.
for complexify.
Like that's your job to direct policy for the council. Thanks.
right. All right. I've got, Joanna, anything else? Then I'll go to Richard. Nope, good. Richard, over to you.
Joanna threw out a question about presentations that we found particularly helpful. I found the presentation by Juliet Rooney Vargas from UMass Amherst, by UMass Lowell, particularly interesting. Her presentation is somewhere in the materials for this meeting. Earlier in the meeting, somebody posted a link to a paper by her and co-authors that is the basis for the presentation she made.
Great. Anybody, any other task group want to suggest, Joanna, any other good presentations to listen to? Chase?
Yes, I would agree with Richard on that one. And I think what was really beneficial in that presentation is the as compared to what question was looking at the types of sort of lower greenhouse gas emitting sources of electricity, which is often, if not pretty much uniformly, left out of a lot of the life cycle assessments that have been done of wood biomass electricity generation over the history of that literature. So like only recently, and really with the work done by Professors Rooney Varga, Bill Muma, John Sturman, that Richard was just talking about, that's kind of like the first analysis that I'm aware of that has a peer-reviewed assessment as compared to what looking at things like solar and wind and low emissions hydropower. So I'd say that's a great place to look. There was also then a later presentation, I think a couple of folks presented at it, that included Dr. Langenier, a Canadian researcher who has peer-reviewed work that answers that as compared to what for fossil fuels in the electricity generation space, particularly looking at oil, coal, and natural gas on a life cycle basis. And then measures wood biomass combustion, looking at several different factors, including residues that would otherwise be combusted themselves, or just residues that would not, or whole trees, and sort of has a lot of different factors in looking at the as compared to what that includes things like feedstock and time scale over a 100-year period. And then on that, I think memory serves, in that same meeting, there was also a presentation done by Dr. Buenacore, who was at Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, I think recently moved to either BC or BU, and he presented recent research on fine particulate matter and other toxic air pollutants, in the as compared to what sort of framework of wood biomass, electricity generation, and thermal applications as compared to the other forms of energy in the United States. And took a historical lens looking at coal, natural gas, oil, over the course of a bunch of years. So I don't remember exactly when those presentations were. I want to say in September, but I think that those are sort of three presenters that I would call out.
Great. I'm aware of the time, so I want to kind of note where we are. And Jane, I don't know whether it's easy to identify which meeting dates those were, and just let the subcommittees know which meeting dates to go to look at them.
The presentation by Lagunière and Bonacore was on September 21.
Thank you, Richard, very much. So September
20. The
20.
one by Juliet Rooney Vargas was a week or two before that.
So it would have been late August, early September. Okay. Great. Richard, thanks for that precision. That was very helpful. Okay, I know some people have to jump right at 11:30. So Jane, next steps. We've had some good discussion on the task group. I think we're getting closer with our document. We haven't we needed some comment from the subcommittee. what is our next step, Jane? If you could describe what your sense is.
Yeah, so an update, I'll probably share the clean version of the document if you're all comfortable with it with the council, and then ask all of you how you'd like to provide the update to the council on Monday. There is a period of time provided for on the agenda for an update on the next steps of the work, with the expectation that a fully vetted recommendation document will go to the council in December. And then, like I suggested and asked all of you, that next time we come together would be one more time as a task group exclusively, and then have either one and then put forward what the task group has reached consensus on or flagged with alternate choices of language, and then carry that up to the subcommittees before going to the December council meeting. So ask all of you, does the task group want to meet next Wednesday? That would be my suggestion, because of the holiday with Thanksgiving, is that we don't take next Wednesday off, but the task group comes back together as just a task group next week, looks at some of these final things that we had, that Jared, others brought up today, as well as any comments from the council. And then I also work to schedule the meetings with the subcommittees, or I guess the following week would be Thanksgiving. So the week after that would be the meeting with the subcommittees. I assume folks don't want to meet the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, but happy to consider it.
Any questions about the next steps there then?
I just want to check the calendar real quick to make sure that all works.
So Jane, just remind me, the next council meeting is when? That's next
Monday.
Next Monday, okay.
The 14th. And then, so we would meet as a task group on the 16th, take the 23rd off, and then November 30th would be the full meeting with the subcommittees again. And then that would actually also give us, if we needed, 2 Wednesdays with subcommittees if we wanted, but the council comes back on December 12th, and that would be the day we intend to sort of put forward the fully vetted final package for the council.
What time on Wednesday?
Next week?
Yeah.
Usual, I would suggest 8:30 to 10:30.
Okay.
Or I think that's what we do, 8:30 to 10:30. Yeah.
Okay, I won't be able to make it.
And Jane, maybe we can check on schedules offline a little bit for after Thanksgiving to see what's possible. I don't know. What do you think?
Are you suggesting that we move the time?
So yeah, Judy, Judy, you cannot make, sorry, again, you cannot make next week?
No, because we only planned out so far and I had everything in my calendar. So I have other Zoom calls at that time slot now.
I think there's already one on the calendar for next week. Yes. Sorry. I had to actually schedule it out through the 16th, but.
Judy, do you want to just check real quickly your calendar? So you cannot make next Wednesday, the 16th at 8:30.
No, I can't.
Okay.
I can make the 23rd.
I scheduled the 16th, and I will say that is on the calendar right now for everyone, and I'm happy if you all tell me to reschedule, but we have had people who have missed the key.
So at least on the 16th, what other task group members want to do real quickly? Do you have in your calendar? Liz, can you make the 16th?
I have it on my calendar.
Richard, can you make it?
No, I cannot. That's the monthly meeting of the Middlebury Energy Committee is that day.
Okay. Billy, how about you?
Yes, it's on my calendar, and I'm happy to be flexible if needed.
Adam? Yep. Chase?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're gonna miss at least Richard and Judy if we do the 16th. So any advice here? We can proceed, play with the language, and then come back and share it with folks, there. We can try to do something else. I don't know.
So is the 23rd off the,
That's what I was just gonna ask you. Why doesn't everybody go around and say if they can do the 23rd or not?
I don't
or
think
if
I
they're
can
traveling?
do the 23rd.
Billy, the answer is no.
It's very unlikely. It may be first thing in the morning, but I'm going to be traveling that day. So
Liz, could you do the 23rd first thing in the morning?
Yes.
Chase? Give everybody a minute here.
This is Richard. The 23rd is fine by me.
Richard, thank you. Megan, how about you? The first thing on the 23rd, we did it first thing? No, okay. What else am I looking at? Judy, you could do the 23rd first thing in the morning?
Yep.
Okay, Chase?
Me too.
Billy, we'd have to check in with.
yeah.
Well,
Adam,
we're already, it sounds like we're kind of equally split already. So 2 people couldn't come on the 16th, 2 people can't come on the 23rd. So I will just say that I hate to say this, but we had scheduled it on the 16th, and it's really hard for me to coordinate everybody's schedules. And so I just want to put it out there that we stick with the 16th. If not, I think we have to look at a whole other date, because it's not fair to switch where have the same people missing either one.
Yeah,
So
I
it's
can
either
try to
totally
make
time.
the 23rd work, but that's not a decision I can make right now. And I'm sorry, I haven't
Oh,
carved
you're about to go. We'd have to check. Jane, why don't we do this? We've got either the 23rd or the 16th, depending on the maximum number we can max. We'd have to check in with Charlie. Billy's gonna have to check in. We'll kind of have to see. So we'll do one or the other. And we'll decide that hopefully in the next 24 hours to get that clear with everybody. Okay.
I'll check in with Charlie. That's a good thing. And Billy, you can let me know.
Just a reminder, the 24th is a day of mourning for us, not a celebratory day.
Judy, thanks for reminding us of that. Absolutely. Okay, so thank you all. Thank you, subcommittee, for participating. We'll give an update to the council and either next. Sorry.
Is Liz Liz, I just want to check in with all of you. Is Liz going to give that update to the council, or is someone? I just want to know, because that was one open-ended thing, how to handle the update to the council on Monday.
I think we wanted multiple people. I don't know whether Liz and a few others would volunteer. Liz, would you be able to help in part?
Sure, like I've done before, I'm happy to kind of just discuss where we are in the process if people want, but it doesn't have to be me for sure.
Anybody else want to kind of join to kind of give an update of where we're at and some of the issues we're talking about?
What Monday?
It's Monday, the 14th. What time, Jane?
It's at the end, towards the end of the agenda, so I believe it's around 1 o'clock on an 11 to 2 meeting.
I have a
But
class
I can
from 8:30 to 2:40.
Okay. Anybody else available potentially? Richard, Chase?
I could be available, but I defer to other folks.
Richard?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what the question is.
Would you be available to support Liz in kind of briefing the Climate Council on where we're at with our recommendations for this group, the task group?
Sure, depending on the date.
It would be the 14th around 1 o'clock. Next Monday.
I'll follow up with Chase, Richard, and Liz.
That's
Yeah,
three of
I
them.
mean, I can certainly I am free to take part that day. I'm not sure I'm the best person to represent this group, but I am free that day.
Okay. Great. All right. With that, we'll get the next meeting squared away, and Jane will finalize a few folks giving an update with Liz, being the council member to be able to help do that and giving her some support from a few others. And with that, I think we'll close for the good work today and the good questions. All right.
Thanks everyone.
Everybody.